We're good? You tell me when. Perfect. Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. Welcome to our operating budget meeting for Tuesday, January 17th. I do need an approval of the agenda. If somebody can move that. Councillor Sherwood, Councillor McIntosh, all in favor? Thank you, carried unanimously. Are there any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none. We had no closed meeting tonight, so at this time, I will ask if you're able to please rise for our national anthem.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, everyone. We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nation and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. This meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. If there is a member of the public connecting via telephone, you're reminded to please press *6 to mute and unmute, and please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. We currently have no rise and report and no council meetings to adopt, so we will start off tonight with a presentation from our acting CAO, Ray Osmond. Over to you, Mr. Osmond.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening. Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council, staff, and public in the gallery. Not going to say too much tonight. Getting feedback today, I might talk too long, but so I'm going to just say a few brief words. I like everybody last night, we went away just to ponder things because that's what we do. And being a Newfoundlander, I try to figure out how to deal with this. Putting on my ocean hat. And I sometimes liken it to we're all standing in the wheelhouse of a ship, and this is the ship. And you know, we never know sometimes when hopefully you're in chartered waters, so that helps. But sometimes when you go to sea, things happen, things change in front of you. And I said to staff a few days ago in another meeting we had that, you know, one thing we've learned a lot in the last couple of years as we plan going forward, and that we have planned, and I think some of the things we're seeing in our budget obviously is about what we've been doing over the last couple of years from a planning perspective. And what I thought about was, I mean, the whole idea that people talk about being pivoting and being nimble, and I looked at it from a perspective. I think we're living in an era right now, where we got to be flexible. And I think if we're flexible, we can make a lot of progress, and that's what we all want to do. I know we as staff are flexible, council are flexible, and we're all in this together. And you know, it's really important that we understand that, because we're all here for all great things that we can do, and it's not easy. But Nandini, the finance team, and all the managers and all the staff below them, I spent a lot of time, a lot of hours in the last number of months really going over the budget. And yeah, some things will never get approved just the way it is, but we strategize until we find a solution. So I want you all to know as a council that staff are here to find the solutions. And this process is about that. This process is about navigating sometimes to make some changes, to be flexible on that route we're going to go on, and look at the best strategy to go forward. So leaving it there. I'm quite excited about tonight. I'm hoping we make a lot of great progress. Ms. Saeed is hoping the same thing, trying to get her to keep moving forward. And so I want to leave it to her tonight and take it from here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Osman. Over to you, Ms. Syed.
Thank you, Mr. Osman, and through you, Your Worship, to your council. Welcome to our second night of Budget 2023. Previously on Budget 2023. Last night, Council had the opportunity to review our capital budget envelope, which is 82.1 million. Okay, all right, there we are. 82.1 million. And as I've explained last night, and I'm showing you this through a chart and a pie chart rather, is that only 3% of that envelope is funded through taxation, which is 2.8%, or 2.8 million rather. And every year, at least the years that I have been around, and I've tabled and produced budgets for this council and previous council, we usually bring a report ahead of the budget process so that council can give us direction as to how much money we should dedicate from our taxation towards our capital budget. Part and parcel of that is to take the guesswork out of it. And also, as council would recall, last year council or previous council approved the infrastructure asset management plan. So 3% or 2.8 million, by the way, the actual net impact is not 2.8 million. It used to be, the envelope used to be 2.6. Council increased it by $200,000. So $200,000 that I explained last night is 0.52%, which is way below what our asset management plan recommended, suggested to keep our infrastructure deficit at bay. So I thought before we start tonight's presentation, I do a quick recap that the capital envelope of 82.1 million is only funded by 2.8 million of taxpayers' money. So let's take a look at tonight's agenda. Tonight's agenda will very much mirror what we did last night. The agenda looks very similar. I will open with the net levy requirement. Then I will proceed on to give you a high-level overview of corporate allocation, administration, and police. These are ad hoc divisions, so to speak, that doesn't belong to corporate services, community services, or infrastructure services. Speaking of which, the GMs will present their respective divisions and department, and then I'll wrap up tonight's presentation portion with 2 recommendations. Now, before we go into recommendation, there's a bit of a preamble. We tabled the budget on December 5th. Council had the opportunity to deliberate the capital aspect or the capital portion of the budget last night. We're doing the operating. So clearly, without any direction from council, we assumed, or the presentation assumes, that whatever that you would see is based on what we have tabled. That said, we did bring 2 recommendations to you. I want to be very clear, and I really would like to see some nodding heads, that as we go through and progress through this presentation, whatever you are seeing is based on what we have tabled. I just want to be very clear about that. That said, Budget 2023 is built against the backdrop of a Canadian inflation of 6.8%. As we were putting together the budget document, the inflation was actually at 6.9. So yeah, a bit of a relief, but not a lot. So Budget 2023 seeks a respectable 3.1% tax levy increase. So here's a refresher. That 3.1% levy increase is against not just the global inflation pressure, but supply chain disruption, labor shortage. None of this should come as a surprise. Capacity building, I think our acting CAO, alongside our 2 GMs, and myself included, we have talked about capacity building, capacity issues. Cybersecurity is not unique to the town of Orangeville. Public sector bodies have been subject to and continues to face cybersecurity threats. Asset management and capital investments, I just spoke to that our asset management plan that previous council approved last year does recommend a higher contribution towards capital budget. I'm not necessarily suggesting that all of that should come from taxation, but definitely there needs to be a uptake on that. Servicing growth, clearly with Bill 23, which is the final bullet, will pose a great threat to how we service growth, not only just in Orangeville, but in any community across Ontario. This has been a request, so I could only gather informations that are already in the public sphere. So these are 2023 levies that have been proposed or adopted by various municipalities across Ontario. Not all of them are our comparators, but I thought I'd provide you some level of comparison. So how do we compare? How does our 3.1% levy increase as compared to the rest of the province? As you can see, City of Guelph is looking for a 4.96. City of Toronto has already approved at 5.5. City of Stratford, which is comparable to us, is looking at a 6.05. You have 5.41. Erin is 4.50. Caledon, our neighbor, 3.68. Mississauga, 3.0, almost on par with us. Town of Blue Mountain, not a surprise, 8.28. Collingwood, 4.27. City of Barrie, 3.95. That is definitely not an exhaustive list. This is the list we could produce based on the information that is available on the internet. So it shows that on balance, everybody is looking at a 3% and above increase. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. We are up against a historical inflationary increase. And I think some of these increases are not just based on inflation. These municipalities are also facing some of the pressures that I just laid out 2 slides ago. They're also facing supply chain disruption, labor shortage, perhaps capacity issue, and growth will impact everybody across Ontario. This is the levy percentage table. Every 1% increase is $383,000. So before I actually walk you through this, if I can go back to the previous slide. So I think one of the misnomer out there is that a percentage increase in Orangeville is the same as a percentage increase in Caledon or Stratford. That is not true. A percentage increase in Mississauga is probably 3-4 millions versus a percentage increase in Orangeville is 383,000. So similarly, 0.75% is 287, 0.50 is 191, 0.25, I think you get the point. And this is really just for reference purposes, so that later tonight when we do get into conversation, we can use this as a cheat sheet. So before we jump into our divisional and departmental budget envelope, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what the pre-growth levy requirements looks like by division. This is very similar to some of the slides and some of the charts you have seen last night. And it is no surprise that service level provided by OPP, Public Works, as well as fire facilities have the longest bar because these are mandated services from different levels of government. So this is again just a snapshot of what we have been seeing since last night. So I'll jump into the service areas that do not belong to any particular department. So I'll go over OPP, corporate allocations, council and committees, and administration's budget. And again, this document has been submitted since December 5th. Everybody in council as well as public have access, and we have not made any changes to this document. So let's start with council. We'll start from the top. So as you can see that council's, by the way, the orange bar represents 2022 approved budget, and the blue bar, or at least it looks blue on my screen, represents 2023 proposed budget. The idea, the wisdom is you compare budget to budget, not budget to actual. So as you can see, council's budget has gone up slightly from 382 to 391, and that is for inflationary reasons. Most of these budget lines or budget increases are for inflationary purposes. Committees again from 236 to 190 because the cost, the legal cost has gone down since 2022. Administration, again, inflationary pressure between 428 to 389. I'll come back to corporate allocation in 2 seconds. Let me go over OPP. OPP has gone up from 8.1 to 8.3. Again, this is due to inflationary pressures. As council is very much aware that OPP usually give us the required budget. We do not set the budget. And also 2023 is the last year of the transitionary billing model that we're under. As of 2024, we will move into regular OPP billing, right? So let me come back to corporate allocations. You're seeing a reduction, so that's a bit of an artificial reduction because, as I said in the beginning of this presentation, that this presentation is based on the budget document that we have tabled on December 5th. And one of the assumptions we made in that document is that we would be using $3.5 million of ORDC money to fund our service level changes envelope. And one of the reasons the corporate allocation bucket looks less is because that is the division or the budget area through which we were flowing the ORDC money. That would change should council opt for recommendation 2, which we will be talking much later in the evening. So I just want to make sure that that is clear, at least amongst the council members tonight listening in. Okay, thank you. So I would now ask Ms. Landry to take over corporate services operating budget. The look of her presentation will be very similar. She will go over the divisions that she manages, and she will also highlight some of the key material changes that we are proposing for 2023. Once again, a reminder, this presentation is based on the document that we tabled on December the 5th. With that, Ms. Landry.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. All right, so for the corporate services team, I'm just going to give a brief outline in terms of what we're committed to doing, and then I'm going to go over in more detail I'm going to call them the material drivers, as the treasurer will put, as it relates to the increases in corporate services related to the SLCs. So the corporate services team is committed to supporting and delivering on council's strategic priorities, including enhancing employee engagement with an increased focus on promoting opportunities for collaboration across the organization and participation in actually corporate staff events. We've had some successes recently, as council may be aware, with some of the communications that are coming out of the CAO's office to internal staff, including some of our barbecue events, which have been most appreciated by staff. Enhancing external communications and community engagement by supporting other divisions with social media content, sharing content in digital platforms to reach more residents. Continuing our focus on financial sustainability and asset management planning and implementation, and continuing to advance our digital transformation journey with a focus on security of our systems. The SLCs that have the most significant impact in our corporate services are the full-time equivalent requests that you see in the budget package, as Nandini has referred to. I'm going to just go over those very briefly, and I'm going to indicate where, if recommendation number 2 within Nandini, the treasurer's report, is selected, where those positions are no longer included. So the first one has to deal with the IT junior help desk technician. Currently, we are struggling to respond to our internal support demands in a timely manner. Also included within this budget is funding to extend internal communications by providing email and SharePoint access to our part-time and casual employees. I point this out simply just because of the fact that when you do that, there is obviously going to be an increased demand on IT support. So the number of users that we have within the building and the facilities and our various facilities impact IT, and extending this internal communication more broadly will have an impact on the number of requests that IT have to support on an annual basis. So that position will be lost if recommendation number 2 is adopted. IT software analysts, as we continue to introduce new software solutions to make our processes more effective and efficient, There's an increased demand to have IT staff that have specialized skills to support users of those software systems. And I'm just going to even refer to tonight, like I'm going to say, even when I started, things were a lot simpler, I think, in terms of just meeting in a room like this and broadcasting. But now we're dealing with hybrid solutions, which require more technical and IT support. That position will be lost if recommendation number 2 is adopted. With respect to the regulatory bylaw work plan, I do want to point out for council's information that that position is retained because it's currently within your previously endorsed section of your budget. I won't go into detail what that position is, the functions of that position, because I think you're all very well versed in terms of what the priorities are with that particular position. Records clerk. This was previously a contract role, and we had proposed that it actually transition into a permanent position. That position would focus on the continued digitization of our town records, the classification of those records. So when I talk about the classification, I'm not just talking about the classification of physical records, I'm talking about the need to classify our digital records from a life cycle management perspective. And I spoke a bit about that last evening as it related to our data transfer, our digital transformation journey, and the need to classify and do life cycle management for not just physical records, but electronic records. So if recommendation number 2 is adopted as it relates to that position, we will be relying on contract staff and not transitioning it into a permanent position. Accessibility, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Coordinator. Staff do recommend that there be a dedicated resource to build on and promote our workplace programs for these particular, for accessibility, equity, inclusion, and diversity. To also support and implement the initiatives that are identified by those respective committees in their work plans, and to also meet our AODA legislative reporting requirements. If recommendation number 2 is adopted, that position is not included. The graphic designer, which you would have seen in the SLCs as a 1-year contract, that position is currently filling a vacancy for someone that is on leave. If recommendation number 2 is adopted, we do have funding for that particular position because we will fund it through a job vacancy. Now, last but not least is the digital coordinator position. And I'm going to actually let Mallory speak to that because Mallory is, I'm sure as all of you are aware, are very passionate about where she would like to see communications go in the future. And we all agree that she's done a fantastic job so far. So she is far better equipped to speak to it and explain what she would see that position doing moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Mallory. Just give me a minute. I just have to call something up on the screen for her.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. Thank you for taking a couple minutes of your time tonight to listen to my vision for the communications team. For context, our current communications team consists of that graphic designer, 1 coordinator, myself, the manager of communications. With that team, we oversee the website, social media, media relations, internal communications, advertising and marketing, graphic design, communications planning for all the capital work, and responding to emergencies like that Christmas blizzard. When I joined the town last year, I knew I had a huge mandate to undertake. I heard loud and clear from everybody that increasing communications was definitely a key priority. I take that mandate seriously and have been continuously finding ways to engage with our residents and stakeholders and raising the bar on what they can expect from the town in terms of communications. I fully understand that raising the bar on expectations with a small team is a huge risk. It means that I have to continuously push my team and work harder to meet those expectations that we've raised. But I know that was the right decision and it was the right direction we took for our team. The feedback we receive from staff, from yourselves in council, and from the community is overwhelmingly positive. Our team is often asked to share long reports, confusing public notices, and messages with complex municipal jargon with the public. It takes both time and skill to digest all of that information and create impactful communications that people actually understand. I refuse to let our team adopt a checking the box strategy, which is what I call it. And that's where you just put something out for the sake of getting it out without actually thinking about the intended audience and what message you want to deliver. One of my key priorities this year is to improve digital communications. I think it goes without saying that we're all well into a digital era where you have to have information available at your fingertips on every smartphone. The website needs to be updated. Currently, our website and digital communications are severely underserviced. We have previously invested in a user-friendly website platform, but we're missing the key piece of having resources that actually work on updating that. If you take a look at our website, you'll find some outdated content, and that's because there's missing that key point. My hope with having a digital coordinator is that we can have someone there to nurture the website, and that would be their main mandate. In addition to all the great communication stuff we've delivered, the digital coordinator would also, develop a comprehensive website framework that gathers updates from each and every division across the town. Improve a digital newsletter that has relevant information that's actually targeted to the different demographic groups in the town of Orangeville. A more robust social media strategy with engaging content about road closures, town services, capital work updates, anything that needs to go out. And more information sharing with mayor and council with all that information we're gathering to help you be the spokespeople in the town that you need to be. And to conclude, my commitment to the town and to this council is I will keep raising the bar on communications, and we're putting our ask out there for consideration for some additional capacity on our team. I welcome your discussion and any questions you have about that. Thank you.
I will close it off for corporate services. I do want council to know that all the positions that have been put forward are equally important in different ways. And we understand that we have to prioritize those particular positions and determine where we will focus. Consideration was given when we were looking at this SLCs to funding perhaps like the position that Mallory just spoke about a different way. We could look at the regulatory bylaw work plan review. However, when you look at that, that's a contract position and it's just funding for 1 year. We believe with what Mallory would like to achieve through that position, there is a need to have a very broad pool of candidates, and a permanent position would go a lot further to achieve that. So if the second recommendation is adopted, currently the digital coordinator position is not included in that. So thank you very much for hearing the corporate services SLC requests, and I will now turn it over to, is it Tim? Tim's next, right?
Next on our presentation slide, Your Worship, is for community services. I'll turn it over to Mr. Osmond.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, Ms. Saeed. Mayor, Council, I'll be brief. First off, overall, the community services budget is pretty much status quo. Main drivers, even though some listed here, main drivers are to do with, basically the COLA and changes in the various rates and so on and so forth. But when you drill down to areas like fire, we're now currently into our second phase of recruiting volunteers, rebuilding our volunteer system because we did lose quite a few volunteers. We're kind of proud of it actually because a lot of our volunteers become full-time firefighters in other municipalities, so they are well-trained and very, very, very competent gentlemen and ladies. So we're rebuilding that and we're looking good. We have a union contract and agreement impacts, of course, that are happening in 2023. And just so you're aware, that contract is going to be up for renegotiation come January 24. We'll probably be starting that process, I would suggest, sometime in September. The library makerspace, you've heard a lot about this position last evening. The makerspace, of course, is being driven by the repurposing of a space at Alder for makerspace. We too, as the GM of Corporate Services just mentioned, we too look at different ways of trying to make this work. The position is important because we don't have the expertise in-house, the digital expertise, nor the IT expertise that needs to focus primarily on moving this innovation forward. The other thing for this position, of course, is that it came out of the business strategy. The branding strategy was done by the library, and that's how it moved forward. And was talked about quite a bit last night. Some of the innovation that needs to happen and will happen going forward in libraries, this position will be a key driver of. And I think that we may be able to pivot a little bit and find ways, since the library is down now. The Prime Library in Mill Street is down, of course, in renovation. We'll be a little bit later in the year anyway before we can get started. It may be a way for us to pivot, if you would, and readjust that if there's another way of finding the way to make that happen. But that's that one position. Economic development, summer student. Economic development, of course, is growing quite a bit. And we also launched a tourism strategy last year. And that tourism strategy is another driver of what we're doing with our students and other programs and services coming out of economic development, primarily to push the tourism piece, but also working with the downtown and with our communications people as well to move a lot of things forward in economic development. The facility side, we're dealing with continuing to build our reserves because these are big operations and big facilities, and there's lots of things coming behind, of course, for Tony Rose and for Alder, and we continue to build reserves. Just a small piece, even though we're keeping the dollar spending down with Tony Rose, we had to replace the front doors, or at least the mechanisms on those front doors, because they're not opening and closing properly. It's just has to happen. Not a big expense, but it is one of our drivers in that particular building. Facilities, for the most part, is basically a status quo budget for a budget this size. It's a minimal impact. And again, facilities, we look at is all our recreation facilities. There's also facilities in here that we do corporate wide. So a lot of things going on in this particular portfolio. In the park side, there's a parks laborer. If we recall the master plan again, the parks laborer came out of the master plan, was recommended under the park side that we need to expand the staff. Right now, I mentioned last night, it came up for a question. We have essentially 3 staff that are working, primarily in the winter months. We have 4 staff totally in parks full-time, and we have 35 and growing parks and facilities, ball fields, and so on and so forth throughout the operation. And this is your main staff component, and you need to build a labor force. And this was recommended a couple of years ago. We tried to do a lot of different things during COVID because we couldn't get our full staff contingent anyway. So we're now trying to get it back to full deployment in the summertime and all year round. And this is a full-time position. Inclusion program for our summer program and recreation events side. Recreation events will come back to hopefully some normalcy in 2023 with the everything going full operation. I got to give kudos to the recreation event staff because they were very nimble and they really got through COVID in a lot of different ways. Very, very creative. But more so now, we are bouncing back, and I just want to. Sharon's here in the room. So I just want to give Sharon a big thank you because she's shown tremendous leadership and management trying to get back on our feet. And she's telling me, and I'm hearing it all the time, that our programs are growing. We're in great demand. We had our rec skating are beyond capacity. We can't handle it anymore. We're actually turning people away. So that's a great way to be. And we're trying to inject more programming, doing a fantastic job across all areas and all spectrums. So I just want to say thank you to Sharon while I see her here. And the inclusion part of that is that we are finding in the summer months, in particular our summer program, where this is driving this. In our summer program, we're dealing with lots of children that have special needs, and our inclusion staff are not specialized staff, but we want to hire more specialized summer program leaders that could deal with this population. That's pretty important to us, and it's just an area we kind of lack in, we're weak in. And again, coming out of our master plan, this is one of our drivers in the plan, that we need to be more inclusive and to build programs around inclusion. And we need staff, quite frankly, to be able to deliver on that. And finally, in the crossing guard world, we introduced a course last year in the budget, and we had most of it all funded. It was just coming forward to 23, and there's a small portion there, plus the other payment, the increases, of course, across the board in the salary component, crossing guard full time. And again, Darla, to you, taking it on as CEO of the library, fantastic work, great growth, great development in our crossing guard, wonderful feedback from people across the community, and it's really raising the bar. And now we deliver services in that area, and we're putting together even more plans to even grow that area, but also to really be more effective on the crossing guard side. And we've looked to IT, and I want to thank IT because IT have provided a lot of support through Heaven. With the, being able to go into GIS and give us the data we need to see how these crossings all work. So behind the scenes right now and in 2023, again, you'll see us coming back, letting you know what the data is saying about some of these crossings in terms of how many people cross, any issues with those crossings, the vehicle traffic, so on and so forth. And we had the ability to do that with the help of IT and with the crossing guard people themselves, and our supervisor doing a phenomenal job. So these are the drivers. Community services, as we all know, is a pretty big operation. A lot of staff, a lot of part-time staff. So it's kind of a piece that's continuing to grow. And of course, we're looking forward to our new GM coming on, and she brings a whole level of expertise as well to help to continue to grow these programs. So that's the overview of community services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond. We'll turn it over to Mr. Koselak now for infrastructure services.
Good evening. Thank you, Your Worship. Just want to give a bit of an overview for infrastructure services. I think last night we gave a pretty good list of some of the projects we're working on. Just wanted to fill in some of the items. One of the areas we didn't talk much about was with planning. It's the first item we have on our list. So with planning, we have our official plan review proposed for 2023. We're also looking at doing a study on the east-west sections of Broadway. There's a lot of development in the area, so we'd like to come up with a plan that we as the town think it should look like, and then the developments would fit into that. We also have the community improvement plan. That'll cover a lot of the downtown and other areas, and the facade improvement program. So in planning, it's one of the areas in our division, we have 4 SLC positions that we've asked for. One of them is for planning. It's a planning coordinator. So currently we have a manager in planning, we have a senior planner and a planning administrator. And I think like most of our groups, it works not too bad until somebody takes a vacation, somebody gets sick, or somebody leaves. One of the things with picking up these new programs, we're looking at adding an additional body to deliver these programs. And I think it provides a little redundancy for the planning department. One of the changes with Bill 109, we have to review planning applications in a timely manner. And that way, if somebody goes on vacation, this additional body will be able to fill in and hopefully review some of the site plans and continue the review process. So when people go on vacation, it all doesn't stop and be paused. The next area we have is public works. So it shows a one-time increase for the sand and salt. We built the new dome, so we had additional material we'd like to have in the dome. So that way we have enough that we can make it through pretty well the worst winter Mother Nature can throw at us. So that's why that's one of the increases. And also for public works is one of our SLC positions. It's a damage prevention technologist, which is a fancy title for a locator. One of the issues we had when we were doing a lot of our work is having utility locates. So they've changed the way things are being done. Now you have to do the locates in a timely manner or you get fined. Previously, our staff would go out trying to do locates, and quite often we'd be a month behind trying to do them because we just don't have the bodies. So that's why we're trying to get this position. So it'd be a locator position, so it protects our infrastructure. They can locate in case of construction. And we're hoping also it'll be a learning position so that person can become a locator and an operator in training for the water system. And hopefully that'll be a mentorship program to be able to increase it and make it through. So that prevents us from being fined if we're delayed on items, and also provides a little bit of training for staff in that area. The third area you see is the capital works. So we have Derek here today. So in capital works, we have the manager, we have Sarah, the project manager, and we have one engineering technologist. Capital works is one of the areas that has a really big backlog of projects that we're looking at getting done. And we had added an SLC position for a second project manager. The thought would be Sarah's position is the lead for the water and wastewater projects. So we're doing the water towers, the improvements at the sewage treatment plant. This other position would be the lead for the road projects, whether we're doing road reconstruction, road rehabilitation, road resurfacing, and would coordinate and deliver that program. And that'll be a program that continues into the future. The third area it shows for transit, but that's underneath our transportation and development area. I think most people have met John Lackey. It's his division. John will be retiring later this month, and one of the SLCs we have with that group is for an additional technologist. Currently, we have the manager, our sustainable coordinator, and 2 technologists. So they operate our cemetery, or they manage our cemetery, they manage our transit, they review all the developments, they coordinate the trees, they do the toilet rebates, they do any water billing issues. They have a large portfolio, and with only 3 people, again, I really noticed when John's retiring and Tony, one of the other people, went on vacation, basically the department shuts down almost for a month because we just don't have a body to backfill. And again, with the Bill 109 having the timely review of planning applications, that's a key item for that area. So if the technologist who's reviewing the planning application goes away, it's nice to have somebody to be able to fill in and continue that role. And I think one of the things I find a little bit lacking is when the developments are built, we don't have anybody that can go out and check when things are being done. I guess that's one thing I found in my former life. When developers are building some of these subdivisions, you'd be able to go out and see when they're paving, and if they're giving you the 4 inches of asphalt, you can protect the town's interest that way by saying it's not correct. So that's one of the reasons we're looking at that position, to be able to do the timely review, provide a little bit of redundancy, and also help with a little bit of inspection and quality control when the developments are being built. The last thing we have is the cemetery. It's, I guess, a small item. It talls back in, but I guess that's the main areas for infrastructure services.
We do have another slide for infrastructure services for any user fee funded divisions. So Mr. Kostelak, if you don't mind.
Okay. And so the building department, there's not much of a change with that. We do have one person that's retiring, so we posted the position to be able to hire a new person in that area. For the water, you can see a bit of an increase. Part of that would be the locator on it, but also inflation costs. I think much like everybody, the electricity's gone up for our pumps. Any materials we purchase to repair a pump or any other work. And also for the wastewater, it includes some of the SCADA costs, but also inflationary. All our chemicals have gone up, electricity's gone up. Even if we need new pumps, you pay more for it than you did before. So.
Thank you, Mr. Kostelak. Your Worship, with your permission, I really would like to spend a few minutes on the recommendations, because I think we do need to explain the recommendations and the distinctions between these 2 recommendations. So the first one is, I'm going to read them first, if it's okay with your Worship, and then I will provide my explanation. So the first recommendation is that Council approve the 10-year capital budget and 5-year operating budget as presented on December 5th, 2023, proposing a consolidated tax levy increase of 3.1%. This is inclusive of all SLC requests and ORDC assumption of $3.5 million transfer. Further to that Council approves the 2023 self-funded building, water, and wastewater budget, as Mr. Kostelak just presented, to approve that as well. So now let me go through what recommendation 1 truly means. So 3.1% is your base budget increase between 2022 proposed versus 2022 approved, rather, my apologies, and 2023 proposed. As Council is aware, and on the budget document, which once I'm done with this presentation, I can bring the document up, but you had the time to go through the document. So I believe between pages 26 and 31, and we'll figure out the page numbers, the SLC envelopes are provided to you. This year, we have asked for 17.1 FTE request, and you have heard our 3 GMs speak to the to the ideas, what would happen if some of the SLCs were taken out, how would that impact to the operating budget or the operation of the organization rather, and I'm sure we will have more conversation around this as the night proceeds. So the first recommendation takes into consideration all the SLC service level changes, which includes operating as well as FTEs. And the assumption of the ORDC funding is essentially to fund these service level changes. Clearly, we will debate, and it can be debated whether ORDC funds should be used towards it or not. And I leave that to council to debate this tonight. But in anticipation of this debate, we now have another recommendation. And once again, Your Worship, with your permission, I would like to read the recommendation. Recommendation 2 states that Council approve 10-year capital budget and 5-year operating budget as outlined in Report CPS 2023-008, proposing a consolidated tax levy increase of 3.1. This removes $1,048,000 SLC request and ORDC assumption of 3.5 million. That Council further approves the 2023 self-funded building, water, wastewater budget as presented. So before I get into explaining recommendation 2, I want to point out 2 things that remain steadfast, whether you're approving recommendation 1 or recommendation 2. The first one is the self-funded divisions building, water, and wastewater are funded through user fees. They have 0 impact on rates. They do not impact anything as far as the 3.1% is. And also, as I've said earlier, the 3.1% is your base budget increase, and that's why both of those 2 numbers are included. So if I could explain recommendation 2 a little further. So what we did in anticipation that there may be some debate or discussion, robust discussion may be around the 3.5 million request for ORDC transfer. If we were not to make that assumption, how do we balance this budget? And as I said to you last night, that the theme of this year's budget is something's got to give. So this is what we have done, and it's laid out fully in the report. I'm just giving you a very high level, and clearly I would be available to answer any question that you would have subsequent to this presentation. So the first thing we did, and this is the upside of inflation, that means we are generating more interest on our general bank account. So in 2022, we are projecting to incur close to $500,000 in interest income. If we don't use this money, this will just become part and parcel of the 2022 surplus. And I've said that, I've indicated that in my report. So what we're doing is we're taking that money and using that against 2023. We're doing the same with 2023 general bank interest increase because this will continue for a while. This is not my prediction. This is Bank of Canada's prediction, not our interest number, but the fact that inflation will continue for a while. We are also using $431,000 of ORDC interest earned for 2022. When we received, or I should say when ORDC board received the sale of funds into 2022, one of the things the ORDC treasurer, who also happens to be myself, we invested this money in different GICs, and that has earned $431,000 last year, only for 6 months. Based on ORDC board approval, that money has now been transferred to the town coffer, and the town treasurer is requesting that that money be used towards balancing 2023 budget. Further to that, we are anticipating a reduction in tax write-offs simply because in the last 3 years, the provincial government has frozen phased-in assessment, and the word on the street, if I can put it that way, is that this is not going to change in 2023, and we are not expecting a change in 2024. And the reduction that we are proposing is very nominal, $250,000. We are also using $866,000 from tax rate stabilization reserves. Tax rate stabilization reserves is created and maintained for that purpose only. is to make sure that whenever there is a spike in tax rate, may that be for inflationary reasons, for service level changes, capacity building, that's what that reserve does. So for us to use that reserve for this purpose is absolutely something that council should consider. Now, amount can be debated, but there should be no debate around whether that reserve should be used for this purpose, because that's literally what that reserve is created. And this is not just unique to Orangeville. All municipal government are required to maintain a reserve like that for days like this. And finally, to balance that 3.5, really the aim is to make sure that if the ORDC assumption is taken away, then how do we balance that budget? So I have introduced 5 different funding sources, and the number 6 bullet point, which is on your screen right now, is to take out a little over $1 million worth of SLC, and all these SLCs pertain to FTEs. In the report that I submitted to council, I've outlined these positions. There are about 9 positions, and if council requires me to go over them, I can definitely do so. So really, what are we doing with recommendation 1 versus 2? Just to wrap up, and I would like to close off the presentation portion so that I can open the floor for Q&A. So recommendation 1 is essentially everything included, fully loaded, the budget that I tabled on December the 5th, with the assumption is all the new SLCs or service level changes are funded through the ORDC transfer of $3.5 million. One of the reasons we did it that way is because that will make sure that we do not have any unnecessary spike in our tax rate or in our levy rate. And I believe on December the 5th, I did answer that question. I believe it was Councillor Sherwood who asked me what would have been the increase if had we not used the ORDC assumption. That would be another 9.2% increase on top of the 3.1. Given that there are not necessarily constraint or restraint around ORDC assumption, but there has been some discussion as to how that money should be spent and whether public consultation should be incorporated. Recommendation 2 really provides council another option to approve the SLCs that we are submitting for your consideration, and really finding a balance and incorporating other funding sources. Not all of them are revenue sources. Interest income is definitely a revenue source, but finding other funding sources as well as decreasing some of the SLC requests. So meaning removing some of the FTE request. So I'm not going to reiterate the recommendations anymore. This brings us to the end of our presentation. I'm more than happy to go over the recommendation should council need me to go over, because I understand further than your deliberation, people are also, our committee members are also listening in. So I'm more than happy to go over them. All that said, back to you, Your Worship. I will end the presentation portion of tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Syed, and to all the general managers for your input and discussion on some of the options that have been added into this year's budget. Before we go into kind of a department by department review and ask very specific questions about the budget, I just want to open the floor to any members who would like to ask a generalized question. Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you, Worship. A couple of quick questions for Madam Treasurer. The taxes that we were paying on the railway, approximately how much a year was that? Approximately, I'm not.
Ms. Syed?
Through you to Councillor McIntosh. So we were paying taxes to 3 different municipalities. And I like the fact that you're asking me for approximation. I would say about $500,000, for anywhere between 455 to 485. This is to 3 different municipalities.
Right. So every year we were paying over around $500,000, basically wasted money.
I will not go into that, dear.
Thank you. My second question is, there was debate earlier on about the ORDC money. Could you explain once again? You had mentioned that that was borrowed from the town rather than technically ORDC money. Does that still hold true, or how was that explained before? If you could just explain it again for us.
Ms. Syed?
Your worship, if it pleases this council, can I rephrase and reframe or reiterate the question so that I understand what the question is? So, Councillor McIntosh, are you asking me the difference between recommendation 1 and 2?
No, I know the difference. I'm just wondering where that money's coming from. And like we have said, we don't want to use ORDC money for the budget. And I agree with that 100%. However, you had said in December that this money was a little bit separate because it was borrowed from the town at one point.
I understand your question now. Okay. So so it actually goes back to your first question. And you basically said that for the last few years, ORDC has been paying taxes to various municipalities. And I kind of give you a rough number. So given that ORDC, the private entity, didn't have any revenue sources per se, the town was fronting an annual, and I'm hesitant to call it loan, but it is loan. It's technically loan. That's how it's seen on our financial statements. So the town, the corporation of Town of Orangeville, has been fronting a certain amount of money every year for ORDC to remain valid. And that money was offered in terms of a loan, interest-free loan, payable back to the town on demand. And that language, I'm lifting it off of our financial statements. Now, when I say loan, it doesn't mean that the town went out and borrowed that money from the bank. So really, we didn't borrow any money from the bank to fund that money, but we gave the public entity town, because we are the primary shareholder of that private entity. So we have given that money to the private entity as a loan. And again, this is not unique to just Orangeville and ORDC relationship. A lot of municipalities have private entities. So that interest-free loan, I believe at the time of that agreement, that once the sale of land goes through, that loan is back to the town on demand. So as of 2021, December 31st, financial audited statements, ORDC owed $9.2 million in form of that loan, and I hazard to do air quotation, but in form of that loan back to the town. So when we were building this budget, and we realized as a group that there is a capacity issue that we are taking on, one of the assumptions, and that's why it's an assumption, and I really would like to highlight that word. The document doesn't say it's a recommendation or a suggestion. The document says it's an assumption. We're assuming that ORDC board and council would be open to that. It's just an assumption. And because we wanted to make sure that the tax rates are not unduly impacted, we use the assumption of the transfer of 3.5 million out of that 9.2 loan that the town was giving to ORDC. That's an aggregate number, by the way. I'm not saying 1 year, we just transferred 9.2. So we made an assumption, given that that money is owed back to the town from ORDC on demand, can we make an assumption that 3.5 million of that 9.2 could be potentially used towards balancing service level changes for 2023 budget? I hope I've answered your question, Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you. When you refer to the town, you really mean the taxpayers.
That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Ms. Said. I'm going to expand on Councillor McIntosh a little bit. So previously, that expense of the taxes fell under corporate allocations, correct? If I'm looking at the operating budget presented on page 53, I don't see, if I look at the actuals for 2021, we would have paid $400,000 in taxes. And therefore then, by my calculation, that's at least a 1% tax reduction if we're no longer paying that in 2023. How come that's not shown in the corporate allocations so that I would see in the 2021 actuals we paid that, that there's nothing for 2023. Sorry, in 2021 we paid it, but in 2023 we haven't. So if it used to show as an ORDC expense under corporate allocations. Why is it not showing now?
Ms. Syed?
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, and respectfully, one of the reasons it's not showing it because we sold the railway, so we don't need to pay taxes to these bodies anymore.
Ms. Syed, I think what Councillor Sherwin, I don't want to put words into your mouth. I think what she's asking is that was reflected in the budget previously, but we don't see that savings reflected on this budget.
Which would be like a 1% tax reduction. If like 1% is 388,000, we're no longer paying that 400,000 taxes. It would have shown as a reduction.
Your worship, if it's okay with you, can I circle back because I really need to look at that
Absolutely.
information. And what I would like to do, as I've suggested earlier, I really would like to bring up the document so that when I'm speaking, not only you can follow it and our community members who are watching and listening in. So if you don't mind, if I can circle back in 2 minutes.
53 in the document or on the.
Okay, your worship, just give me 1 second. I'm just gonna change my screen. So if you have another question, Councillor Sherwood, let me get to that and then I'll circle back to this question.
If we were to take recommendation 2, part of recommendation 2 was to use $250,000 of tax write-offs. Again, going back to page 53 under corporate allocations, the full budget request is $250,000. If we take that away, we have 0. We know there's tax appeals. How are you going to fund that if we took option 2 and took that whole $250,000? Because in the real world, there's never not been successful tax appeals.
Ms. Syed?
That's correct. So thank you very much for that question. You're absolutely correct about that. Our funding envelope for that particular line is 250, and that's the one we took out. Again, recommendation 2 is based on or is predicated on the anticipation that the ORDC assumption may not be something that council would like us to consider. So I had to, or we had to figure out ways to, let me step back. There is a need for capacity building, as you heard from our CAO, acting CAO, and current GM of Community Services, and the other 2 GM. So my task as the town treasurer is to take into consideration the things that you would like to see in a budget document, as well as senior leadership. So given that we're taking away the ORDC assumption, I have to go somewhere in the budget to find that, to balance that. Do I absolutely agree with you that if we take away that bucket, then really that line item is completely vulnerable? Absolutely. But we're taking, I don't want to use the word risk, but we're making that change because in the next 2 years, we are not anticipating the level of appeal that we receive in a typical phased-in year. Because in the last 2 years, the provincial government has frozen phased-in assessment. We really didn't see an influx of, in fact, not a lot of tax appeal. Now, these are the vulnerabilities that we face, and I'm glad that you're making a point about it, because at the end of the day, if I may, Your Worship, we have a very, very ambitious budget. We have a budget that is undertaking, under the direction of our CAO, it identifies capacity issue, and thereby it proposes ways of mitigating those capacity issues. We have a limited assessment base. We're in an inflationary year. Capacity building, even the best of circumstances, is a huge undertaking. We're undertaking this in a year where Canadian economy is facing historical inflation. And as I said, and you probably get tired of me saying this, something's got to give. So that one item, although there is some exposure and vulnerability, we used it. If council thinks that that shouldn't be touched, then that $250,000 goes back into the bucket, and then something else has to come up for consideration. I know this is probably not the answer you want to hear, but this is the answer I can provide for you tonight. That said, I do like to come back to the question that you asked previously. So if you would, and again, I'm asking Mayor's permission, if you could give me a couple of minutes so that I can set up my screen so that the budget document is up there, and then I can give you the answer that you're looking for. Is that okay? Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Syed.
So just while you're doing that, I'll just talk about the tax write-offs. And again, I'm very surprised that you would recommend that to be zero, because we just know that there's going to be tax write-offs. If I go back to 2021, that wasn't a reassessment year as well, and the actuals were $120,000. My concern is if you wipe out the $250,000, we know there's successful appeals, we're mandated to pay those, we can't hold back those payments, we have to make them within a timely fashion or we'll be penalized, then I'm surprised that you're asking to wipe it all out. But I hear what you're saying, and I was just wondering, I think you need to leave something in that bucket, even if we go with recommendation 2, even if it's to take more out of the tax rate stabilization. I just wonder how you anticipate funding those that are going to be mandated to pay.
Ms. Syed?
So thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Sherwood. So one of the consideration is every year we do have a sizable surplus. So if you look at the budget, which I cannot predict sitting in January what the sizable, and I shouldn't. And one of the reasons is under the Municipal Act, we're required to deliver a balanced budget. So you don't want your treasurer to project surplus when she is required under the Municipal Act to deliver a balanced budget. But that said, historically, we have always seen a respectable level of surplus. So when you have, so if a successful assessment appeal does come through, the idea is not that we're not going to pay it. We will pay it, but that'll go against any surplus, which I cannot predict. So am I taking some educated risk? Yes. Am I doing it because I'm trying to, for lack of a better terminology, find a balance with everything else being equal? Yes. But that said, this is why we're in front of you today, to have these deliberations and these questions that you're asking me. So is that a risk? Yes. Is this a calculated risk? Absolutely. If there is appeal, would we be able to pay it? We are liquid from a cash flow perspective, and I did speak to you last night about that. Would we be able to find $250,000 in a $130 million budget? Absolutely. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Syed. We'll give you a moment to find that page. Ms. Syed?
Yeah, Your Worship. So I hope everybody can see the document up. And please, Your Worship, if you don't mind confirming that you can see my cursor, that's the best way I can navigate through this page.
Yes, we can.
So, through you to Councillor Sherwood, if you see over here where I'm putting my cursor on and where it says investment in ORDC, it's right below the Credit Valley Conservation Authority's expense line. I'll just give you a minute to find that line. So it's kind of sandwiched between tax write-offs and Credit Valley Conservation. Are you with me? Okay, thank you. So if you would just stay with me on that as I'm moving my cursor. As you can see, in 2022, we reduced that expense. It's on the expense side of things, right? It's an expense. So we reduced that because we knew in 2022, these lands are, we are selling the railway was for sure. But if you go further, we reduce the entire envelope. And as we do that, that becomes part of our tax savings. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, because I was looking for that magic $400,000 number. So I thank you very much for pointing that out and clarifying that.
And if I can just further make a point, the reason we reduced it from 400 to 200,000 because some portion, because we sold the land or we sold the railway in different parcels. So we still had to budget a little bit of money, or half of it in this case. I know you can't see the actual amount here, but we still made sure that we put some money in the budget should we have to pay taxes. But as you can see, in 2023 and the outer years, that expense item is gone. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Syed. Councillor Andrews?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Syed, and the general managers for providing their overview. Tonight's operational discussion is focusing on a lot, as we know, and much of the discussion is focusing also on the FTEs, service level commitments. I was interested in hearing some of the points that were highlighted in recommendation 2 with the reduction of some of those FTEs. What was the process that was discussed, be that departmentally, to determine how some of those FTEs were either removed or delayed? I'd be curious to know.
Ms. Syed, would you like to take that, or Mr. Osman?
I'll give it a go.
Okay.
And then if I fail miserably, then clearly Mr. Osman to rescue. Was there a science behind it? No, particularly. It was a science and an art. So clearly, as you heard earlier part of our presentation, the positions that we did remove, they do play a huge role in the overall operation. And I'm not going to repeat what the GMs have already spoken. So going back to answering your question more specifically. So one of the first thing I looked at is to protect any compliance related positions, right? And that doesn't mean all the positions that were cut are not to an extent compliance related, but things that are absolutely required. We tried to protect that. And that was the first round of conversation we had. The other thing is that, and I think one of the things, and I hope Mr. Osman will speak to that as well. Our budget process, although you see us once a year, but the process will start again in 6-7 months. That's the nature of this, right? So one of the conversations I had with our senior leadership is that I understand that some of these operational pain points are here, but they happened over time, right? And we are going back to this process, this budget process, in 6 to 7 months' time. So given that, what are some of the positions you can live with? So the first answer I got is none. I'm sorry, I'm not putting anybody on the spot here. But after further back and forth, as you can imagine, we had a very similar conversation like that. We went through that list, and I have to say that it was, it took us a while to come to that, because which one do you get rid of, if I can use it that way, right? So really, to answer your question, there wasn't a particular science or a method that we followed. But the main question, and I'm looking to Mr. Osman, the main question we asked, what are some of the positions we can, and again, we live with or live without for a while until we come back for further deliberation. That said, I also would like you to understand that the GMs during their presentation did highlight what it would mean losing those positions. I'm looking towards Mr. Osman now, if Your Worship, Mr. Osman would like to add to it.
Mr. Osman, I'll turn it over to you for additional comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. You know, it's a bit of a pain point, obviously. Nobody wants to cut any when you get into the FTEs. And I want to clarify first the context by which this CAO, acting CAO, put forward to, hey guys, put everything on the table. When I'm saying hey guys, I mean all the team, not just the GMs. I want to hear, and I've spent a lot of time since I've been in this seat, listening to what our delivery pain points are. And when you look at some of the staff pieces, and you know we throw this capacity word around, it becomes a bit of a, sorry, I'm off screen here. It becomes a bit of an issue because we want to spend a lot of time listening and figuring out why are we behind on something? Why aren't we getting this service delivered the way we should be delivering the service? Whether you're talking about communication, whether you're talking about infrastructure services, public works, snow clearing, grass mowing, recreation, it doesn't really matter. I'm here to tell you that it's across the board. And, in this budget, we've already covered off a whole lot of things. This budget covers a lot of things. This is a huge budget, as the treasurer has actually spoke to quite eloquently. The fact is, though, that from a service perspective, I want to make sure, and I don't live in an illusionary world. I don't think you're going to prove everything. Absolutely not. But I wanted you to know, and I told you this before, is that, you need to know what the capacity issues are, and if you do everything that you want to get done in this community and move things forward and maintain the momentum, we'd like to have these positions. This is what the staff are saying, right to the front lines. This is where our weaknesses are, and we're not going to get to it all in 2023. Do you understand that? So when we did the discussion around, well, do we cut here, do we cut there? One of the things the SLCs does is not all about FTEs, it's about expenses, okay? So there's a lot of expenses here that covers off. Okay, so we want to have the actual body to do that, but somebody in the team is going to try to do it. At least give them the equipment and materials to do it with. It would be a lot better, of course, if we had some of the expertise that we really want to get into. One of the ways to look at it now is that if we can do the option 2 and have some caveats thrown in that, if you can say to the team, go back and look at some of the points that we think as council that you think may be really, really important. I'll give you a really good one that I really would prefer that we not hold off and get it done, because I've spent a lot of time working with infrastructure services. We recruited a really, really strong team here, and we've done a lot of work. They've done a lot of work, in IS. And, and I know some of the major projects that we've been struggling to get done, no fault of our own. It's just that timeframes, everything else, and now capacity, is that we got to have people deliver on it. And quite frankly, when you're on the front lines dealing with contractors, and we deal with contractors every day, if we don't have that person to go in every now and then on a very methodical basis and say, hey, this is not happening. We need this to be happening. We can't go in 6 weeks later and say, oh, nobody checked on that. So some of the points that, GM Tim Kostelak is talking about, and the capital works manager is talking about, is in order to get things done and move this huge piece of work along, we need people to help and support that team. So there's some pieces that even though we tried to make all this thing fit, they kind of fell off the board a little bit, and we're trying to maneuver back behind to figure, okay, if we don't get the person, how do we make this happen? Can we make it happen? Yeah, we'll make something happen, but it won't be the ideal. There's a part of me is saying to council, well, yeah, we can approve the budget, but allow some flexibility. I mean, the treasurer said many times, we all know that every year we end up with a surplus. There's always a surplus. There's always vacancies. We never get filled for a little bit later. It's difficult getting vacancies filled. There's always that liquid, if you would, that's moving around. And is there a way for us to say, hey, way for you guys to say, hey, staff, we don't want to be here discussing which position is the best position. Administration knows exactly where that demand is, but is there a way for council to be flexible to say, hey, if we give you an extra, piece of dollars or take these few dollars, can you decide now to prioritize? Can we decide that communication is a huge driver for us? We're making great inroads. It's supporting the entire corporation. We're delivering on a lot of things. We have a request from council in a lot of different circles saying, hey, we got to up our game in the engagement of the community. We're talking about major projects coming up and want to have more engagement with the community. You've seen it already. You've seen some wonderful engagement, and that's happening. In order for us to continue with that, some of the expertise around that table is not. We need to help that a bit, and we need to deliver on that. So there's some key positions, and if we can salvage 2 or 3 of those, as we mentioned tonight, or even 4, whatever it is, by finding some other way of financing that, maybe there's something little loophole here or there, Councillor Sherwood. That we can make these rate stabilization or something else that just squeeze a little tiny bit out of, or allow the flexibility for staff somewhere in the year to try to address through some savings somewhere to launch some of these positions because they're really necessary. This guy has been not arguing. We've had a lot of debate around the table, and the treasurer makes great points. Her job is to balance it. and it has to be balanced under the Act. We understand that 100%. Our job as a whole overall corporate team is to deliver. And there's a lot of things that we've talked about that you want us to deliver on, and we need to enhance our capacity to do it. It's been difficult over the last 2 years. We kind of left it because you can't do anything anyway. You can't get out there in the world because COVID is doing its thing. Well, I'm here to tell you what Sharon's experiencing in recreation, we're experiencing everywhere. People are on the move. They want this. We've seen changes in parks. More people are in parks. More, more games happening. There's more maintenance got to happen, and people are demanding more things a lot quicker. And I think Orangeville, I mean, it's an envy of Ontario. I mean, Orangeville is in a good position. It can have some flexibility. It got flexibility within its financial means to be able to maneuver and pivot a little bit to satisfy some of these things. Not all of these things. But if there's something in particular is coming up here tonight that you say, something I agree, or I think we should be looking at that, tell us that, but say, hey, we let us have the, the direction to make some decisions be back here to say, hey, how can we make this work? And I think that's where I'm to. And I wanted to put it on the table because you clearly need to know. I don't think we should be hiding things away. Full transparency says, here's where we are. Yeah, there was like 17 positions. Yeah, we can probably cut it back 10 or 11, and we might have to do it over a period of time. But there's got to be some way of maneuvering through that. I think that's where we're to.
And just to make a comment, Mr. Osmond, thank you for your transparency, your honesty, your passion on responding. Successful organizations are built with great people. We have great people here. I'm proud to be a part of this organization in this particular role. I know that the general public will criticize, we're adding or potentially adding some additional people. But we also have a responsibility of not burning people out. We have a responsibility to the taxpayer to fulfill some of the commitments that we have. And if we don't do so with the right personnel, we're going to fail. We'll be criticized. You talked about the successes that we have in recreation as one example. We have so many others that are now becoming best practices for other municipalities to even observe. That's one thing that I like to wave the flag about. But the other is that sometimes we get criticized, and all of us here receive all kinds of feedback at various times. Why are you doing this? Why are you considering this? We know what the implications could be, but it's imperative that things don't get put on the side of somebody's desk. Mr. Kosilek, you ended up zeroing in on something that I thought was bang on, because here we have the pressure from the province to build more. We're going to continue to have more development that's going to be forced upon us, and if we don't have people that are going to be doing some checklists with some of these developers, we're going to have, roads that are not going to be meeting these standards that are expected. We're not going to end up having communities that are going to be long-lasting or neighborhoods that are going to be long-lasting. We're going to have things fall through the cracks. So we have to find, and I've used this term before, we've got to find that sweet spot. Part of the sweet spot is the recommendation in number 2. I think that certainly my fellow members of council are going to have further deliberation. And it may not necessarily be the FTEs. It may be some of the other points that are within the operational budget itself. So let's see where this dialogue goes. But I truly thank everyone that is part of the team, and I really look forward to further conversation this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Was there any additional general questions before we move into a departmental review? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Excuse me. I'm curious about the way we lay this out. It says that we'll approve a 10-year capital project and a 5-year operating in this budget, correct? So to approve the 10-year capital project, we should talk about some of these other issues, and we mentioned them the other night. Tony Rose is in here for 2024 at $2.3 million. I know we're focused on this year, but we are doing a 10 and a 5 here. I'm not comfortable with that. I just certainly don't understand what the 2.3 is. We haven't gone through those details, but just from a large standpoint, I don't want to do that. I don't want to put a nickel more than we need to into that place to keep it going. And here we are trying to cut and nickel and dime each other as we go, but the building's coming down. So I know it's 2024, but again, 10 and 5, I think we should have a brief discussion about some large ticket items that are on the capital budget, not just this year, but outside as well.
Ms. Syed, could you make comment on that?
Thank you, Worship. So this language has been recycled over the last 3 budget cycles that I had the privilege to deliver budgets here. Although we are submitting a 10-year, multi-year, and a 10-year capital and a 5-year operating budget, council usually approves the outer years in principle, and the current year budget is what gets approved. And next year, when I come back again with another beautiful document, you will have another go at 2024, and then the year after that at 2025. And in the past years, the outer years have always been approved in principle with the understanding that the council, whoever the council members is at this table, will have the opportunity to deliver the current year, even if we have provided those current year projections in a previous year. And one of the requirements of Ontario Regulation 588/17 is that at a minimum, municipalities table 10-year capital plan or capital budget. So we are fulfilling that requirement, but that said, and more specifically to Deputy Mayor Taylor, as you've been at this table in the last 3 budgets, the outer year have always been approved in principle, in spirit, so to speak.
Deputy Mayor, yep.
Just one follow-up, and I think I've got it in my head exactly what you're saying, and I'm aligned to where you're going. But yesterday you were talking about, hey, council, just so you know, you've already approved these projects, and now here they are into the budget, and we would have approved them in 2022 as they were coming along. We had debate on them, and then they come to budget. So in my mind, like, whether it's fair or not, I agree, we approved those projects in principle for 2023. But when you get to the budget, it's maybe fair or not fair, or planning or not good planning, but all's fair in love and war. And to me, even though they were approved, they're going to come off. So, it's a yin and a yang here, and back and forth, right? So I don't know. It just feels like the language is a little bit different as we go into a budget season versus when we're talking about different initiatives that we want to do.
Ms. Syed, there's a difference though from the carry forward
Yes.
projects in the budget, correct?
And if you would allow me,
Yes,
I
please.
could explain this.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. This is actually an amazing question from an education perspective. Thank you. So first of all, we're talking about completely 2 different things, Deputy Mayor Taylor. So one is carry forward projects that are already been approved in previous budgets, not projected budgets, in previous budgets, where these projects are either carry forward because they're multi-year by design, or the projects are delayed for a host of reasons, cost overrun and labor shortage, whatever that may be, right? So when we carry forward budget or projects that are approved or leftover projects from previous budgets, which is a completely different thing than approving a 10-year projected plan where the outer 9 years are approved in principle, in spirit, and the current year is approved in its entirety. So those are very different things.
Does that help, Deputy Mayor? Do you have anything further?
It does kind of. I think once we get into the debates, we can get into the details of where I'm gapping on that. But again, like I think an example of a 10-year project that we all knew was coming, but we weren't happy about, was the fire department needed a new building. I don't begrudge the fire department anything. They do a great job, but it's a huge bill, and I wasn't excited about spending the money. And so now when I look into this other one, I don't know that I want those things in our planning. Like, we should call them something else, like Rotary Park or something great, not to put money into a dying facility. That's my point.
Ms. Syed, do you have anything else to add? Or Mr. Osmond, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to clarify for the mayor, and I think it'll clarify things. That $2.3 million, quite frankly, can be taken out right now. And the intention was to take it out, but the $2.3 million was associated with a whole bunch of things that gathered up over time from all these studies I talked about last night. One was with, involving the pool, and if you continue to do this, we got to do that. Remember, at one point, in the previous council, we had a big project to expand Tony Rose and put in bigger change rooms and those kinds of things. And that's where that got captured. We kept pushing it because we weren't, wanted to invest in more money in Tony Rose. So that's really what happened. So given that where we're to now is we're going to take a close look at Tony Rose, I would take it off the table. The intention was to take it off the table, but it's in that 10-year projection. You don't always keep pulling these things out because, we're going to get there in 2020. This year in 23, you're going to discuss 2020, 24, and that 24 budget is going to be gone, and something else is going to show up because you'll have direction on Tony Rose, and it may be something that's going to be pushed out 2 or 3, 4 years from now, and it could be a lot bigger number dealing with a different facility. So you're absolutely correct, and it's something that you've talked about in a couple of meetings now. I would just take the $2.3 million right off the table in 2024. It really doesn't need to be there, but it needs to be reconsidered in your new feasibility piece, and it'll come back. And simple things like we got to fix the doors. That's about it. That's all we want to do. Things will happen in the building, but right now we're in good shape in terms of keeping it alive, if it wouldn't kicking. So I would take the 2.3 million off the table and then review it when we get into 23 with all the informative detail and data you need. And then you can make a decision on what happens in 24, 25, determine what the number might be. So I would just go ahead and just take it off the table from my perspective.
Ms. Ayad, do you have something else to add?
If I may, Your Worship, round up the essence of this particular conversation. Any direction for subsequent years, subsequent to 2023? Absolutely. Please provide us directions, suggestions. But that doesn't change the 2023 envelope, and that's what's really in front of you, your council, for approval tonight. As I've said earlier tonight, that we will be back at this process in 6 to 7 months, at least staff will be, if not council. So what we would do is around that time, and I always bring a ceremonial report to council every year before we start the process so that you understand how we're building this document. Clearly, albeit very high level, but I do give you a heads up that this is what we're adding. These are some of the economic pressures that we're facing. So for any outer years, 2024 and beyond, my team and I would be more than happy to take direction and incorporate that in future budgets. But if I could ever so politely ask you to think of some of the impacts of the 2023 budgets, because taking out items right now from an outer year will not have any upward or downward momentum on 2023. And this is not really for Deputy Mayor Taylor, but your entire council, to keep that consideration in the back of your mind as you're going through the rest of tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ayad. At this time, it's 8:32. We're going to take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll come back into departmental discussion. So I'll see everybody back at 8:42. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so we've come to a point in the evening where we're going to open up the floor to questions. We're going to follow a similar procedure to what we did last night, which is to review each department one at a time. I will tell council that I don't have the full budget document open, so if I hit a department that doesn't have any asks on it specifically, just tell me to move on and I'll keep going. And one thing that I just also want to point out is that, you know, my hope for tonight is that whether we're ready to approve the budget tonight or not, that we can come together with some recommendations for the treasurer and for staff to take back tonight, so that when we do come back to our next budget meeting, we're being productive and not just circling around some of the same asks and same discussions that we've already talked about. So with that being said, let's start with corporate services. We'll start with the finance department. Is there any questions from council on anything from the finance department?
Your worship?
Oh,
Sorry
Syed.
for the intrusion, Your worship.
back.
So I do have the document open on the screen. So if you don't mind going through like chapters, so chapter 4 would be council and committee, chapter 5 administration.
Perfect. I can run
Thank-
it that way too. That works.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't
No,
mean
that's
to
good. That is
intrude.
good. So we will start then with chapter 4, which is councils and committees. Was there any discussion on council or committee from an operating perspective? Seeing none, we can always go back if somebody changes their mind. Number 5, chapter 5 is administration, corporate allocations. Was there questions about corporate allocations? I have one discussion in corporate allocations that I would like to talk about, and it's the community grants portion. Currently, and treasurer can correct me if I'm wrong, again, I don't have it open in front of me. I believe the community grants portfolio right now is at 80,000. Recently, especially over the last number of months with COVID and recovery of COVID, we've had a number of our organizations who do serve a more marginalized population who have come and asked for additional funding. I'm worried that our $80,000 envelope is not enough. We've also had some of our organizations looking for funding that will take us beyond 1 year. So typically the process, especially for our new members of council, when it comes to community grants, organizations are expected to fill out a community grants application at some point through the year, detailing what their need is, providing some financial background, and then that ask comes to council for us to approve. Sometimes we see things in the neighborhood of $500 or $1,000 for smaller asks. Sometimes we see things like Blues and Jazz who come to us for an annual contribution of about 17 or 18, sometimes even a bit more. And some of those organizations have asked in the past for us to consider adding a line for them. A lot of these organizations run completely on volunteers, and it's difficult. Our community grant process can be a little bit labor intensive to fill out all those documents. And for these organizations who we know we continue to support, it would be great to see a line where we could allocate some of those funds. So an example of that would be the food bank in the past, and I believe it was last year or the year before when Heather came and presented to us, had asked if we would consider adding a line for $20,000 a year. That would be our annual contribution to the food bank, and that would save them having to come annually and ask for more money. Knowing Heather, she's always going to come to our council and give an update on how things are going at the food bank, and at that time we can continue to check if that process is still working. My suggestion as I look at it, and another one, Councillor Sherwood, that I want to talk about tonight is about the Out of the Cold program. I believe that this line might be a great spot where we could allocate a specific amount of money to whichever organization comes forward and says that they can run an Out of a Cold program for us. So my suggestion, before I kind of get to that piece, is that 0.25% of our budget equals $95,750. My thought would be that we add that $95,000 to our budget and have that be for any of the organizations in our area who do look for funding that goes beyond annual. So in particular, I would say for organizations who are asking for a continuous donation of 5 years or more, we could use that specific funding envelope to take care of those asks. So I would think of things like the food bank or specifically the Out of the Cold program. And my suggestion would be that this year we allocate $30,000 of that 95 to whichever organization is willing to come forward to offer the Out of the Cold program. And that would make sure that we're giving the adequate resources that organization may need. So I would ask council if they would consider that. We have had a lot of asks from some of these organizations, and this would just make sure that we have the money to consider that. So as we move forward, I hope that you would consider that, and I'd love some feedback or questions. Deputy Mayor.
Just to make sure I understand, thank you for this, Your Worship. You're not asking for an additional 95,000. You are asking for an additional 95,000. So can you lay out for us what that is again on the 95? Because there's, in my mind, there's the 80. So you're going to almost $200,000.
Mhm.
Okay. So if you do that, I'd like some more details. And secondly to that is I'd like Theatre Orangeville brought into that mix.
I think that's a great ask. They're another one who's asked for an increase to their annual funding, and that could come from that line as well. I know that we have some other things that are going to come forward that are similar from some other organizations, and I don't want to talk about those till they have an opportunity to present to council as a whole. But knowing some of these things that are coming forward, we do have that $80,000, which is used always, almost in full, by those smaller asks, whether that's the Optimus Club is coming for 5,000 or the Kin Club needs X number to run the Santa Claus Parade. And those asks will continue to happen. But I think as we're going into a time where, we've talked a lot about how inflation is impacting some of our residents, we're seeing an increase at the food bank. We're seeing an increase at some of these organizations. And this would be a great way for us to be able to give back to that in a way that, the $95,000 would represent 0.25 of an increase on our tax line. And I would hope that through this discussion, we can find somewhere else to cut that money and reallocate it to this. I think the Out of the Cold program is an important one that I would like to see highlighted right away. But that 80,000 my suggestion would continue to be for annual grants. So people would have to apply for those. They're the one-offs. I need $1,000 to run this canoe program at Island Lake, whatever it may be. But the 95,000 would be earmarked for organizations looking for 5 years or more of ongoing funding. So that could be Blues and Jazz, it could be the food bank, it could be other organizations. And I would propose that 30,000 of that be allocated for Out of the Cold. Was there any additional questions? And I don't need a supporter right now. I can bring that back up later. I just wanted to get into the discussion and keep it in everybody's mind as we keep moving forward some of the other pieces. Deputy Mayor?
I appreciate you bringing it forward. I do want some time to digest it. That's not how I envision what you're saying. I do think there's a lot of merit to it, but I would throw out then, and I just have to, we all have our things that we want to have happen. You're mentioning yours, I'll mention mine. Like I'd like Theatre Orangeville to have at least 20. So there's my thoughts, additional.
Yeah, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. So you and I've had in-depth conversations about this along with Councillor Andrews. And, I'm very passionate about, getting this Out of the Cold out and running and allocating 30,000. I was going to ask the treasurer of somehow finding it. So getting back to where the mayor is going, deputy mayors, these are for organizations that will likely be asking for at least 5 years or more. So we know Theatre Orangeville is in there. We know that the Orangeville Food Bank's in there. Other organizations compared to ones that are coming in and maybe the Northman hosting the Minto Cup in specific year need money. Those type of examples where we would use that other 80,000. But I think that I'm definitely going to be seconding this motion. And I think that we have wiggle room in there with that 90,000 if we at least give 30,000 towards the Out in the Cold by whoever runs that. We would have to put out an RFP or whatever. Then we still have that other flexibility for those requests from those other places like the theater where we know they're not going anywhere anytime soon and they'll fall within that 5-year criteria.
Deputy Mayor?
When we do these things, we work together, and I'm asking that it would be specifically written in firm.
Councillor Sherwood?
And rightfully so, just like I was specifically asking for 30,000 of it be allocated for Out to Cold. So I'm very respectful of your request. If you want a specific amount allocated to that, then by all means you have my support.
So before we turn this into a formal motion, we'll hash some of those details out maybe before we look for a formal motion to the clerk's office. But for now, just keep that in the back of your mind that that's one of the pieces of corporate allocations that I was going to ask about. So with that said, is there any additional items that have questions on the corporate allocations component? Ms. Syed?
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. To you, Your Worship, so that additional 95, so that we're all on the same page, That additional $95,000 is a quarter of an increase, as you have said, rightfully so. So if we were to add that to our current ask of 3.1, we're looking at a 3.35, or alternatively, we can take the equal amount of money from some other areas. I don't know what that area is yet. You can provide me direction, if you will, but those are the two options as to how to fund or how to increase that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Syed. And I believe that we'll probably have some ideas as the discussion continues. So was there any additional questions on corporate allocations? If not, then I'll go to Chapter 6, which is the Ontario Provincial Police. Was there any discussion about those items? Deputy Mayor.
It's not in here, but it's the police. But I'd like to ask Mr. Osmond again. It came up in our Police Services Board meeting today. There's $188,000 in debt taken on for further renovations of the police station. You're looking confused. It is from my understanding, is for a boardroom. Have I not got that right? I don't. There's $188,000 of debt taken on for the police station. It's near the back of the deck. I didn't write down the page. It's on additional debt taken on, $188,000.
Mr. Osmond or Ms. Syed? I know it's a capital project we're discussing, but I'll let one of you field the question.
So, Your Worship, if you would give us a couple of minutes or a few minutes as we proceed, I mean, that would allow my team and I to look it up and provide the information as it sits in the document, and then perhaps we can aid Mr. Osmond to give you an answer so that he knows where to look for that information.
Just while she's looking, I'll clarify through you to the worship to Deputy Mayor. The boardroom is we can handle that within our budget. We're just doing a wall and bringing the community room, if you would, on the first floor back into the play. That's the intent. That's not, the room is there. We got to change a couple of doors. Not a big job. I think what we're going to find, it's a part of the carry forward that with the contract is not completed yet. So there's a couple of things with the contract we held off on, and it's probably just still there and running. There's still a blast door we're waiting on. It's not in yet. It's not installed. So there's a couple of pieces that there's no new money. We're not asking for no new money. It's not a big project. Upstairs in the boardroom, our intent is to make the boardroom smaller to facilitate some investigative officers on the upper floor, and it's just using the floor space we have. Not a big project by any stretch. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond. Ms. Syed, did you have anything to add, or did that cover it?
So, thank you, Worship, through you to Deputy Mayor Taylor. So I believe this is a capital project unspent fund, like it's a carry forward. So I don't believe it's a new debt or a new request. So just the page number is 217. So 277. Right. So I believe this is a carry forward project and we have 188,000 of unspent funds that we're bringing into this year. So I hope that helps Mr. Osmond with his explanation as well.
Mr. Osmond?
Yeah, Your Worship, I think it's some tidying up to do with the contract, but I think we're going to be in good shape there. I don't think that's an issue at all. I think it's just a carry forward. It needs to be cleaned up. Like I said, we have one outstanding item with that building, and it's just a supply chain major issue and some of the configuration of the door, and that's on order right now. But in terms of there's no projects on the table for that building. That building's in really, really good shape. We're satisfying the lease agreement with Infrastructure Ontario on that building. And so there's nothing new that we're proposing, certainly not in 2023 or 24, nothing that I can see in the near future.
Was there any additional questions about the OPP? Seeing none, we'll continue into corporate services. So we can start with perhaps the finance division. Was there questions about the finance division specifically? Seeing none. The clerk's department, which includes bylaw enforcement. Seeing no questions there. We'll turn it into the IT department. Human resources. Going once, going twice. And finally, communications. Any discussion about any of the communications components? Okay. We will turn it over then into community services, and we'll start with Orangeville Fire. Was there any questions about any of the proposed changes in Orangeville Fire? Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to perhaps the chief or Mr. Osmond. I see there's a request for 2 additional volunteer firefighter positions at a cost of $36,000. Is that because we don't have a sufficient amount of people to cover our residents? Is this due to growth that this request is coming through? Or why are we asking for 2 more additional volunteers?
Would you like me to turn over to Chief Morden? Chief Morden, if you're there. I can see you. Perfect.
Good evening, everybody. And so as far as our volunteer firefighters, we're bringing it back up to a level where we were approximately 10 years ago. So a number of years ago, we did have a roster of 32 volunteer firefighters. And just because of the makeup of the town and a lot of our firefighters working outside of the town, we feel a need to bring that number back up to an additional 2 volunteer firefighters so that we can cover those daytime hours a little better. So we're just, and then also, I think it was mentioned before, you know, we have quite a turnaround with our volunteer firefighters nowadays, as full-time fire departments really enjoy snapping up our well-trained volunteers. And it's just to try to keep us on an even keel so that we don't feel that we're dropping below a standard that we should be at.
Councillor Sherwood?
And just to follow up, so we are complying as far as, I would assume that there's some kind of magic number as to the number of staff compared to residents. So this is kind of relating to growth, I would assume then.
Chief Morden?
It is to a degree due to growth. We work on our NFPA standards, National Fire Protection Association standards, and we look at our response times and staffing on those apparatus and getting them out the door in the proper amount of time. And by adding those 2 more people on, we're bringing up our rosters so that we can get them into the station quicker, get the vehicles out quicker as well.
Perfect. Was there additional questions about fire? Many members of council? No? Orangeville Public Library, which includes crossing guards. Is there questions about that department? Councillor Andrews?
There we go. I did press the right button. Thank you very much, Your Worship. This is pertaining to one of the lined items, makerspace technician. And I know that we've spoken about the FTEs. And Mr. Osmond, you ended up saying something that was intriguing to hear based on the recommendations that were put forth by the treasurer. And the timing has a lot to do, I think, with how this specific position could be supported. I'm going to be candid. I've connected with Ms. Fraser about this. I know that this is an intriguing opportunity for the public library. It is a new cutting edge area of community libraries. Maker spaces are becoming very important. But having done some research, I also know in my previous experience, the starting rate for an individual with the competencies that you may be looking at may not necessarily be at the rate that was highlighted in the FTE report. So back to the point that I ended up making at the beginning of my comment here, you referenced the timing of this, where part of it could be, if I'm correct in hearing, somehow implemented, but not the full financial allocation. And then we see maybe where this goes, maybe as a contract position, as opposed to a full-time complement. There is some risk with anything when it comes to this particular area today, because it is changing as we see some of the developments in makerspace. And I think we want to make sure, from my perspective, I want to make sure that this is done right. And so I'd like to hear your comment and or Ms. Fraser's on this.
Mr. Osmond, did you want to start with some comments?
I'll certainly start. Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Andrews. Thank you very much for that point. a couple of ways looking at that. We did likewise with the crossing guard supervisor. I mean, we started out partly mid-year, and we introduced a position with a total buy-in from council because we seen where it was going, and it was great direction. What I suggested was that we could, because Mill Street was down, and because we got to do the work to repurpose the room. We have a room, of course, that we've taken back through the old Humber agreement, and we have the audit data and all the the wiring, the cabling, and all that's there. But that's why we can do it for a little cheaper than you probably would do a full-fledged, if you would, makerspace. So the makerspace it's there, the room is there. Now we need a body to bring it forward. The intent was that we could look at doing it starting in halfway through the year, get 6 months funding in 2023, and then bring it back in 2024 that funded the further 50% in 2024 and make it a full position. It's still a full position, but it won't be giving you an impact funding wise until fully in 2024. The other way to look at it, I'm like you, it's a little risky. Going out in the marketplace and finding an expert at that level, albeit it could be a little bit less. I mean, we're trying to look at numbers, but when we looked at it from a compensation review, we put it through compensation review, the expertise needed in the position, and that's the number it came back at. So it was reviewed by our outside consultants, and to bring it down might be putting us at risk and delivering the wrong kind of program at a wrong level. So that's the intent. So if we look at it from a perspective, we'll do 50% in 2023 and then move forward in 2024. It might be another way of looking at it. The other conversation we always continue to have in-house, by the way, is there something we can do to rejig our own operation to make positions work? And we looked at that. It's very difficult in a library. It's at capacity. It's trying to deliver at capacity, and we don't have the expertise in-house, so we got to find that body. And that's just simply where it is right now. I think you're absolutely correct. Is one of the most innovative things that's happened in libraries in the last few years, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years. There's been a lot of funding provided for maker spaces to libraries across this province. So not just the province, the country, a lot of communities have bought into it and spent a lot of dollars. And I think when you find a new space being developed in the future, a bigger space, maker space will just be part of the overall environment. And I think that's where we're trying to head to. And so the project that was delivered on, the branding project and the delivery of the new library you're going to see in the future, this is a big piece of it. It's a small piece right now, but it's going to definitely grow. And we just need that body to drive it. That's basically where it is. And if Darrell would like to add to that, certainly.
Yeah, I just wanted to be perfectly clear. I am a supporter of the initiative. I know that the business plan and everything that is tied to the library on where it is to be in the future is very important from a community perspective. I think it's just a matter of determining exactly that individual or individuals that may spearhead, using the term appropriately, this particular initiative. There are many other examples that are out there where there are partnerships. There's partnerships with economic development offices. There's partnerships with the private sector that have helped out from a technological point of view. I know that some of the investment, and I think if I'm correct in saying so, there was some grant money that was also highlighted for some of the equipment, 3D printers, the connection to other forms of invention and innovation, and the past experience I have was more in a research and innovation center, but it had those kind of components to it. So I think where I'm wanting to conclude is to find out exactly, as you've been eloquent in providing me with the direction, is the allocation would be possibly for a contract position for 2023. We revisit this with the idea, or would this end up just automatically rolling over into a full-time position in 2024? I'd like to have that clarity.
Ms. Fraser, are you wanting to make comment? You can start making your way up, and Mr. Osmond can. I think Councillor Andrews makes some great points. There's a lot of innovative ways that we could take care of this. Another one that I was thinking is maybe it's a part-time position to start with, where we've got a makerspace technician who comes in after school and on weekends and starts the program really going. And maybe it looks into a full-time as the program continues to grow. I think there's lots of innovative ways we could take care of this, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Fraser for additional comment.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and Councillor Andrews, for your question. You're absolutely right. We can explore other options, but I will my staff are at capacity, and to add this to the side of a desk risks we know that the project would not be successful, and we do want to be successful. The town may have some of the skills required in-house within other divisions, but all the divisions are max. So my staff are excellent on the front lines. They're very empathetic. They're very knowledgeable about finding information. Cutting edge technology is not their forte. Even my full-time staff who are at capacity. This position, yes, we could start slow. You know, we've started slow to begin with because there are a number of projects we're going. This makerspace is a key component to the new vision, and the vision is to be bigger and better, and based on the community engagement and the work that the steering committee did, this is what this will benefit the town in many ways. I do believe, Councillor Andrews, that this makerspace will help youth hone skills and develop skills. It will help user groups, small service groups create, whether it be small products or use the Media Lab for product pictures and things. Working with the economic development is absolutely, Worth and I are already working on that, and there would be other partnerships in the town that we will explore. As you know, part of the new plan is to increase those partnerships.
Partnerships play an important role in maybe covering potential costs down the road. And I was not implying this would be on the side of someone's desk and or added to existing staff. I think there's some intriguing opportunities here. For example, our school boards have some of those expertise in-house already, where maybe there is some bandwidth for someone in the after hours that Mayor Post has indicated, after school, on the weekends, where, the right individual might be the individual that morphs into that eventual full-time position. I just think that we have to be strategic, as no doubt you are, and I am in full support of your vision. I absolutely believe in it, and I believe in the makerspace, but I think we have to be strategic on how we fulfill that position, because it has to be done the right way.
Absolutely. Your Worship, may I?
Absolutely, Ms. Fraser.
I'd just like to comment on the skills required for this position. It will be a multifaceted position, and I am looking for this person to come in and unbox that equipment, figure out how to run it, help me write policy to take to the board, help write procedures, and train the rest of the staff. And once that is set up and running, I do imagine that the PSAs, who are public service assistants on the front lines, who are doing our program delivery now, will be able to find skills, new skills, and new interests that they can run new programs. But that initial skill requirement, and Mr. Osmond's correct, we did do a draft job description that was approved by the board, and that was what was just a temporary or a quick review, may I say? Is that fair? To come out at that number. It is a big number, and but it is evaluated according to all the jobs in the town. Is that?
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just was going to echo what you had just said, Mrs. Fraser. At my library, I had to start a makerspace, and the inception of the makerspace, learning the new technologies, it's very difficult. It's a steep learning curve. And if that's not your area of expertise, it won't be successful. So you really do need someone at the forefront of cutting edge technology to operate all of this new equipment to make it beneficial for the community. And someone who really understands it then can educate your existing staff if perhaps they're ill or the other issues that might happen and so forth with staffing. But I do see the importance of having this role. Maybe the timing isn't right as was suggested, But to get it off the ground, you really need someone with a high competency in the area, and maybe that might not be an evening and weekend job. I'm not sure where I stand on this, but I just know the importance of it being successful starts with the right person in that role.
Was Ms. Fraser, did you have something to add?
Welcome to the board.
Was there any additional, well played. Was there any additional questions about the library or about this position in specific? Not at this time. We don't have a motion ready to go. Okay. We will carry on then into the Economic Development Culture Division. Was there questions about any of the items there? Seeing none. Facilities and Parks. Any questions regarding facilities and parks? Is there a quiet group tonight? Recreation and, oh, Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Your Worship. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask what the park labor position entails. So it's just a general question. I wasn't really sure what that position was.
Mr. Osmond, do you want to field that one, or is there somebody on the line who would take care of that one?
I'm going to pass this on to Mr. Cosgrove and keep him going up there. So if Charles, if you can turn on your camera there, or
he's there. Mr. Cosgrove, over to you.
Through you, Mayor Post, to Councillor Pendergast. The parks laborer position is basically just that. He's a general laborer. He does everything from cutting grass to snow removal, repairs, installation of benches, signage. It's a catch-all position, a laborer type position. Currently, right now, we have one laborer, one horticulturalist, coordinator, and a supervisor. We do have a very, very small staff in our parks operation. And just recently, as of last year, with us taking over considerable amount of grass cutting from the infrastructure services, which includes wells, boulevards, and some of the retention ponds, it puts a lot of stress on the staff that we have right now. I'm sure there's a few council that may remember that we did receive a few complaints about why is it taking so long for us to get through just a grass cutting cycle. We went through where we could actually go through a cycle in 5 days, and then with the new requirements that we took on, that grass cutting cycle actually went to 10 days. If it rained, it went to 12 or 13 days before we got back to a starting point. And that was just to cut the sports fields in the main areas that you could see. We really could use an additional laborer within that department.
Answer your question, Councillor Prendergast?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cosgrove.
Thank you. Was there additional questions about parks? Seeing none, I am going to ask a question. I'm going to go back one division because I was so excited to move on that I forgot to ask my own question. My question is actually for Ms. Phillips, if she's on the line. Is Ms. Phillips there?
I am, Your Worship.
Good to see you. Thank you. I had a question about the summer student. I see that it's allocated as $14,587 for the summer student. Is there any possibility that that could be a part of the Canada Summer Grants program? I know, having worked with other municipalities, there are a number of those grant positions that can be placed. And is that one of them that could be one of those components?
I certainly hope so, Your Worship. The summer grant applications are completed through the Human Resource Office, not through our office directly. So I've certainly indicated that we would be happy to receive one of those grants if it was awarded. And I'm not sure if Ms. Goen is here, but Jennifer might have further information. As I understand it, they do apply for on behalf of all of us for the summer student position. So I'm assuming they would include us in that grant application as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Phillips. Ms. Goen is here, and so is Ms. Landry, who I think is going to answer on your behalf.
I believe so, and Ms. Goen will correct me if I'm misinterpreted the message she sent me. We have applied, correct, and the funding that's included in the budget takes that into consideration.
I believe, as I understood it, Karen, that we apply for the full amount of funding required to support the student over the year, and then if the grant is awarded, then we just generate savings to the town. That's not correct.
Thanks, Ms. Phillips.
We
Ms.
didn't.
Goen is- I'll let her speak. Just give me 1 sec. Ms. Goen, over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. We did apply for the funding recently. It comes up in January, February of every year. It's for approximately 16 weeks, and we get half of minimum wage per position, but it's usually capped at about 25 to 30 hours per week. And often the students work 35 or 40 hours a week. So it's partial funding if approved, but we don't get the approval until usually April of each year.
Thank you, Ms. Goen. So the 14,000 assumes the full funding is on
Correct.
us, and otherwise the grant will be assumed.
Correct.
Wonderful.
That's
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Phillips. I appreciate your answers. So now I will move on into, I guess that's it for community services. Oh, recreation and events. My apologies. Was there any questions on recreation and events? Councillor Andrews, do you have a question?
Yes, I do, and I had one, and I've lost, well, if you don't mind, if we can come back, thank you. I had it and.
Sounds good. Okay, so we will head over then into infrastructure services, and we will start with the planning. Oh, do you have it now, Councillor Andrews? Okay, we'll start there.
Thank you. As was discussed earlier about recommendation number 2, and I wanted to make sure I heard this correctly because there were a number of different personnel or FTEs, proposed FTEs that were not included. And one of the ones that was very important, and having experienced this, be that through family, members of our community, the accessibility component, the inclusion piece, as Mr. Osmond was very clear about, and I don't know if this falls under an AODA compliance piece, but regardless, what is important is that we have members of our community who are finding it more difficult because other agencies are not providing them with the support. And this is where your community can step up and recreation and events can step up in providing support for members of our community. The complexity is that you don't have staff that are fully experienced, and you have to have individuals that are to fulfill some of those challenges whenever you have young people that are coming. I know my colleague here on the left of me who has a direct connection to the education world. You know what it's like when you have a variety of students that are also brought into your classroom. So I think that the comment I just wanted to make, Madam Mayor, is the fact that I think this is an important role that we have to seriously consider. I don't know if it was one of those that was, in fact, it was.
It was not included.
It is, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, infrastructure services. I'm just going to do the whole one all at once. Was there any questions about infrastructure services as a whole? That would include planning, capital works, public works, which includes cemetery, water, wastewater, transportation and development, and building. So to Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Your Worship. So free transit program. I feel with the Canadian inflation rate trending at 6.8 from 6.9, we shouldn't offer this program. The past council made a motion to offer this program, but in my opinion, I think we should defer it until January 2023. And I'd like some more discussion on that.
Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. To Madam Treasurer, as far as the gas tax, I'm not asking for exact figures or anything like that, but the more ridership we have, does that increase our gas tax that's given to us?
Ms. Syed.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor McIntosh. So ridership is taken into consideration. I don't know exactly what the calculation looks like, but it is taken into consideration when gas tax, its provincial gas tax, is calculated, or our allocation of the provincial gas tax, I should say.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the more riders we get, the more gas tax money we get.
If it's okay with Your Worship, I would like to defer that to somebody with a little bit more expertise, because like I said, I know that ridership is included in the calculation, but I wouldn't know the exact correlation.
I will turn it over to Mr. Koselak unless Mr. Lackey's on the line.
Through Your Worship, I don't believe Mr. Lackey's on the line today. I believe the funding formula is 70% based on ridership. So if we do have an increase in ridership, then we would have an increase in funding. But we can look into the details to get the exact numbers and bring it back to council at a later time.
Thank you. So for that reason, I won't be supporting the motion because basically we're increasing our gas tax money by taking on more riders. So I'm hoping that it'll come close to evening out. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. And I think that, I'll make a couple of comments on this. I'm pretty passionate about this program. We talk a lot about transit, and we talk a lot about, we hear a lot from residents about seeing buses going empty at certain times of the day. And what some of this pilot project does, and in Orangeville, we're in a bit of a unique situation because we're not a highly transit area. So I'll speak about my daughter, for example, who's 17. When she was 13, 14, 15, there was no way she was going to get on the Orangeville bus. And it's not because she was afraid to get on the bus or anything that was going to happen. It was because she didn't know how to use it. She had never been exposed to public transit in a way because she hadn't had to. At a time, she did finally get onto the bus, and we did some lessons on how the bus routes work and how the timings work and how to know where to change buses. And once she became comfortable with it, it allowed her to utilize the bus. That same goes with her friends. So now, now she has her car, but before she did, she would hop on a bus and go downtown with her friends, where before she would be relying on me to come home and give her a ride. And for a lot of our youth in particular, a lot of the non-use of transit by our youth is because they're not comfortable with how to use it. This program allows them the opportunity to do so. The communications team has been doing a great job of sending out some information about it. Now, the second component is there's a real social piece here. Quite often we make decisions on programs based on what other municipalities have done. Quite often that's used as our measuring piece. This is our opportunity to be an innovator in it. There are a lot of, in Canada anyways, most European countries offer free transit. It's a very, very popular social program. It allows people to move around. It's great for economic development. It's great for the environment. It's good for a lot of things. And from a social component and a community building component, it's a really, really important aspect of what we can do. What this 2-year pilot project allows us to do is see what the feasibility of our transit program is, where there's opportunity for growth, where we see opportunity and gaps. And I think transit's one of those things that people have a hard time funding because when you see a bus driving empty, well, why are we going to keep putting money into it? But transit is a system that if you build it, they will come. People won't ride the bus if it's not reliable. People won't ride the bus if they can walk there faster. The more that we can invest in transit, the more we can grow transit. And one great way to do that is to encourage people by offering them free transit. So I know I've already heard some really great feel-good stories, and they're anecdotal at best, but from hearing from patrons of the food bank who now this trip to and from the food bank cost them nothing instead of some of the money that they were relying on. We've heard from single moms using it who are now more comfortable because they don't have to take their kids into the car and worry about all those car seats and all those things. So there's a lot of really great social pieces that are already starting to come out as anecdotal evidence. And I really believe we're going to start to see some of the data come forward too. And I know Mr. Koslak had mentioned yesterday that we're going to see checkpoints through this program and how the transit program is going. And at any time, if a year in, if this is an ultimate failure, we can cancel the project then. But to cancel it right as it's getting started, I think would be a detriment to our community. So I'll leave it at that. I will turn it over to any questions from anybody else. Councillor Andrews.
Just a comment, Madam Mayor. And again, you referenced Mr. Koselleck. I'm a data-driven decision maker, and I think that this is important to hear that you have indicated that if things are not progressing positively, we will end up revisiting and make a decision on it, but we have to give it some time. With Mr. Koselleck indicating at, I guess, different checkpoints within the calendar year, we'll find out if we've actually had an increase. And I'm encouraged by the onset since this started. I'm seeing a few more people, and I'm hearing some more stories, which are incredibly positive at this time of the year. On the other hand, we've also had other information about transit systems across the country, and they know that they have indicated very clearly that they've seen ridership decline because of the fact of COVID. And now the need is people are being asked to come back to the workplace, but there's some inflationary challenges that exist with many of them who are now confronted with them. So I'm encouraged by the couple of weeks that we've had this going. Let's see where it is. I think one of the key checkpoints would be 6 months, just to see where we are, and then of course make some decisions after a calendar year.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So full cards on the table. I want to be respectful to all my council mates. I didn't bring this forward because the vote was 6-1 last time. I was the one. I would not have talked to this again had it not been brought up by our esteemed colleague on the end. I do think this is a terrible decision. This is an absolutely terrible decision. It makes no sense financially to do this. There is no facts and figures to back up that ridership will increase. The gas tax, I pulled up the report. The gas tax, the funding is based part on ridership, but staff have not been able to confirm the exact funding formula. We don't even know if we're going to get the extra money. So just to try and put the gas tax to this, it's a fool's game. There's no data here. If this was a boardroom and in business that I've been in a boardroom, you would be fired for bringing such a thing forward. This is not a well planned out thing. This is a wing and a prayer. And I don't think we should be doing this whatsoever. And again, no disrespect to my friends here, I would not have brought this forward had Rick not, Councillor Stevens had not brought this forward. But to me, we should have clear drivers of what a success is. We have none. We're talking here about 25% might be a good barometer, but we don't. The reality is I've fought for this transit system twice now. I've been on the transit committee twice trying to get this thing to go. The reason the transit committee or the transit system doesn't work is because our service is poor. We don't pick up people on time. The buses don't come at a regular time. We bring them in school buses. If you improve the service, the ridership will increase. At the end of the day, we still have a crappy service on crappy buses that aren't looked after on a regular basis. And now we're going to lose $162,000 a year because we're not charging people to use it. So I'm passionate about it because we're trying to save money here and we're not fixing what the problem is. People will be glad to spend money to ride the buses if it was reliable, came on a regular time. We had the 4-bus system set up like we all want it to be set up, and we're going to serve all the rest of the town, but we don't. And until we address those, the other issues are going to continue to persist. And to me, we're throwing away money. So respectfully, thank you.
Was there any additional comments? Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship. Respectfully, Councillor Stevens, I wouldn't support the motion to withdraw this as well. Again, this is a pilot project. We can pull the rug out of this anytime we want. I think it's a value of a service that we have to give. Transit anywhere isn't a money-making venture. We know it comes at a cost and an expense. Yes, we're losing fare revenue, but I still think it's a service that we need to provide. Just like having a hospital, in my opinion, we need to provide transportation, alternative measures for other people to get around. And I think we need to let this pilot project speak for it, whether it's successful or not.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Was there additional questions? Councillor Prendergast?
Thank you, Your Worship. You know what, as we try to move towards a less car-dependent society, I think municipalities, we're responsible for transit. We have a responsibility to the residents here, namely high school students, seniors, those disenfranchised who may not be able to own a vehicle or operate a vehicle. Those in need of support will rely on this transit system. And I was speaking with Mayor Post previously. It might encourage young riders to become more familiar with the transit system and use that into their 20s if they choose to stay in town. It is something that I'm excited about as a council member, and I hope it continues. And I do look forward to seeing some progress and increased ridership with that first report for 6 months from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. I'm going to turn it over to our clerk, Ms. Khan, who wanted to add a procedural point. Ms. Khan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. Just in listening to the discussion, I just wanted to add a little bit of context around the reconsideration of a motion that's been passed. So if the I'll back up. Since the fare-free transit was approved last year by the previous council, in order for that approval to be rescinded, essentially for that motion to be reconsidered, in essence, that's what council is speaking of doing. That motion would need to be put forward on the floor by a member that was on the prevailing side of that motion. And then it can be seconded by any other member. So I just wanted to put that out there for council's consideration.
Ms. Khan, while we're on that point, so Councillor Stevens or Councillor Prendergast, not having been members of council at that point, are not eligible to put a motion of this type forward?
That's my interpretation. That's correct.
Thank you very much. So I guess it is up to Deputy Mayor. He was oh no, I guess it was, sorry, not Deputy Mayor. Anybody except for Deputy Mayor, if you would like to move that forward, Councillor Andrews, Councillor Sherwood, or Councillor McIntosh or myself. I won't be moving that forward. Was there any will of the other members of council prevailing side? None? Thank you very much. Was there any additional questions or comments about infrastructure services? And yep, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much. We happen to be on transit, and there was a lined item, page 64, 264. It referred to vehicle leases, and I just like some clarity to that. It was a specific amount. I have to pull it up on my particular piece here. And following all the chapters, and so thus I ended up moving away from page 264.
Councillor Andrews, if you look at the team screen, Madam Treasurer's got it up.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Can I turn that over to Mr. Koslak?
It's the 166, 192.
Yep, through your worship. One of the things that we're looking at doing to improve transit is doing an on-demand service. So with this, we'll have smaller buses that can pick people up in areas that currently aren't serviced. There's a number of areas where we have main routes. And actually, I'll back up just a little bit. One of the things the town did is about 8 years ago or 10 years ago, we changed the routes. So now every one of the routes for the buses, they go by a major grocery store, they go by a bank, so they all service somewhere. So if you're anywhere, you can hop on the bus, it'll take you to a grocery store, it'll take you to a bank, take you back home. So that was one of the improvements that were done a few years ago to make it more efficient. One of the things that we're looking at, and that's with the leases, we're looking at doing an on-demand service. So with that, we'll have smaller buses that can service some of the areas where we have limited transit service to be able to pick people up and bring them to a node as part of the transit system. And it's also looking at when we have the transit terminal constructed in that area where the former bowling alley is on the county lands, we'll be able to connect into that area. So those vehicles are leased. It's a 5-year lease from Enterprise we're doing it through. So they'll just be able to try it and see and try and improve our transit service. I think as Deputy Mayor Taylor said, if we have a better service, more people ride it. And I think this is one of the big ways to make the service even better for the residents.
Thank you, Mr. Koslak.
Just on that comment very quickly, I don't want to spend too much time, but Mr. Koslak, I know that we have the corporate leasing agreement with Enterprise. And so thus I hope that the type of vehicles that are going to be utilized are reliable and you know, are there where the public will need them.
Mr. Koslak?
Through your worship, yes, they are more reliable. They're a smaller vehicle too, so they're more fuel efficient. They're more like a 12-seater type vehicle, so they will be able to get in a lot better areas. They will be more fuel efficient, and they can serve as a backup vehicle. That's one of the issues right now. People see our school bus out there. We had some mechanical issues, and I think with the supply chain, I think it took us 2 months to get a fuel pump for one of the buses. So this way we'll have those buses also as a little backup in the system. So if we do have peak hours, if we get a lot of students riding, we can put some of these in to augment the system, but they will be for the on-demand, and that'll be launching more later in the summer once we get the terminal built and have everything ready to go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Koslak. Councillor Prendergast and then Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you. For the on-demand services, yesterday we heard from a delegation about, or pardon me, Mr. Zambito spoke to us about the possibility of offering services after hours, perhaps on weekend evenings in the downtown core, maybe to the west end on a loop. I'm just thinking outside the box. Maybe that's some way or an application we could use that for the lack of, I guess, safe rides home in the closing time hours of the bars downtown, or maybe also alternately from the west end to the farmers market on Saturday mornings to alleviate that pressure on parking downtown and make it easier for folks to get around from other areas. And also the Veterans Way subdivision, which is an area that is a bit cut off from transit right now. So I could see them benefiting from this service also. Thank you.
Mr. Koslak, you've got a comment?
Yep, through your worship. And that's one of the benefits of having the program. It'll service some of the underserviced areas right now. I don't know if we'd look at doing a nighttime sort of midnight run. I think that would probably be better serviced by taxis, just because you wouldn't have that much ridership at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning. I think it's better if we can try and work with the taxis to have more service available for residents. But And that's one of the things we'll bring back the report. We'll know more what the ridership is. We'll know the timing people are on, and it may result in us extending our hours. Right now, it's roughly 7 till 6, 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 at night. We may find we still get a lot of ridership at 6 o'clock. Maybe we want to extend it to 8 o'clock. But once we get the values of the transit ridership, we'll bring it back to council. And again, as part of the pilot, we can look at amending our program.
Thank you, Mr. Koslak. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Through you to Mr. Koslak. And for purposes on the screen, if you could just go one screen up to the Finance Department. I'm looking at the licenses and support where there's a 246% increase in the ask, where we went from 24,000 up to 84,000. Could you maybe explain to me perhaps what that licensing and support, is that all in regards to the expansion of the transit, or is it something else within transportation and development?
Mr. Koslak. Ms. Syed.
That is the, sorry, through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, that is the software to track on demand and fare-free transit. So that's the software that is required to kind of track the fare-free transit of the program. That's my very crude explanation.
Mr. Koslak, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I believe that's part of the tracking system to be able to track the ridership, so we have the numbers for it. And also with the on-demand system, we're going to work with one of the suppliers. It'll be, you can almost book it a time. Say I want to be picked up at 9:20. It'll take you and drop you off at a certain area. We're going to work through the details on that, and we'll have more information on it later in the year. But fundamentally, that's what it's for.
Thank you, Mr. Koslak. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Sherwood, do you have another? No. Any other questions for infrastructure services on any of the items listed? Seeing none. Any questions regarding debt overview or reserves overview, chapters 10 or 11? And again, seeing none. I'm going to go back and give everybody one last kick at the can. Is there anything that anybody didn't get a chance to ask that they would like to ask before we kind of move into the next portion of where we're going with this? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Sherwood, maybe? Councillor Sherwood.
Your Worship, it's a very minimal amount, but I just wanted an explanation under financing. Item number 105 is restructuring funds for $10,000. It's just a very minuscule amount, but what is restructuring funds?
Ms. Syed?
Is it under financing or finance division, Your Worship, if I may ask that?
Looking at page 292, and it's item number 105 under your service levels.
Okay, so restructuring fund, generally speaking, is, so let's say you have and again, this is just an example of, so you have an existing position, let's say you have an FA and you want to build that position into a senior FA to either attract individuals or retain somebody or to improve the some of the requirements of that position. So instead of calling it a different position, if the delta between where the position is sitting in terms of its salary level to where we would like to take the position, that delta would be called restructuring fund. And 9 out of 10 times, that restructuring fund is a very minimal amount.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that helpful, Councillor Sherwood?
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so we're kind of at the point of the evening where we need to move forward with either some recommendations, some changes, or moving forward one of the recommendations in the agenda package. I will leave it to members of council if there are any motions that they would like to have come out of the discussions that we've had today. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I'd like to go home. So what I would like to do is go for the gusto here, and I would like to recommend that we move forward with recommendation 2. However, with a couple of caveats. One is I would like to include your motion, and before we leave, like as part of this motion, I think your motion needs to be more detailed, and we need to suss out exactly what we're saying in that motion. But in the spirit of what we're trying to do here, recommendation 2, with the addition of your motion and the discussions that Councillor Sherwood and I had into that motion. And then I would like to leave this for council again. Like, this is my new style in term 2 for me, and that is I just would like to throw out an idea and have everybody weigh in. I would like to throw out that we make this recommendation to at a 2.7 and a 2.8% increase, and simply allow staff to come back with the details of how they would do that. And I would throw that out for debate.
Before I throw that out to with council, can I maybe turn it over to the treasurer for comment on procedurally if that works and how we can move forward? Ms. Syed?
Thank you, Your Worship. So my comments are fairly general. I mean, clearly I'm not trying to sway council one way or the other, although I would like to speak to the recommendations if I do get an opportunity tonight. So first and foremost, if we were to include your recommendation or your ask earlier, that's a $95,000 addition. And I did mention that that would, if we were to fund that through taxation, would be a 3.35 tax rate from a 3.1. Alternatively, something else can be taken out from the budget. That direction has to come from council at this point in time. Further to what I'm hearing, and again, I'm trying to capture the Deputy Taylor's request at this point, is if we were to, and for my clarification, Deputy Mayor Taylor, so you are asking council to consider to reduce the 3.1 to either a 2.7 and 2.8. Okay. So that would be a reduction of, we're doing this in real time. So that would be a reduction of 0.3, and in dollar values, that would be a reduction of, I feel like I'm doing the prices right.
More than that, Ms. Syed, because I believe you would be at then 0.6 if it's.
0.6, yeah. 0.55. So let's play with some ballpark number. You have a table that I actually Your Worship, if you may give me like a minute or two, I want to bring up that table. I think that will help council as well as our viewers.
Absolutely. Yeah, Deputy Mayor?
If I may, so again, so you would take its 3.1, so essentially you would go to a 3.2 under that scenario, right? And then again, what I'm asking my council mates to do is say, do you think this is a good idea? If you do, what would the rate be? We would all align, and then what I'm suggesting is we're not the experts. We're the oversight board. We would ask the operators to go back within a freedom of framework and come back, and you tell us what you want through the CAO. And so what I'm throwing out to this group is, what is the rate that you would want to be at? And then I would throw that rate back to Mr. Osmond and his team. And you're the operator, you tell us what you would like to do in terms of, and it's going to be an FTE discussion. That's what we're going to have to decide, because we're not getting anywhere on any of the initiatives. We've gotten zero. So it's going to be an FTE.
So I think I just want to kind of rephrase what you're suggesting is that we move forward without the actual recommendation in the agenda, but we move forward in the spirit of recommendation number 2, but have staff and the Treasury team come back at our next budget meeting on the 24th with recommendations on how to get to the levy increase rate that we decide on as a council tonight. And if that means, again, changes to FTEs, then that would be the case, and we could move forward from there. So it's more about what number we're comfortable in rather than it is the components themselves.
Agreed. And if we could too, I would ask that you write your recommendation, and perhaps, and it wouldn't be colluding because there'd be 3 people, but I would suggest that Councillor Sherwood and myself weigh in on your recommendation. We have that ready to go for next council as well. And this meeting that we would have in the next budget meeting would be very quick, and we'd be done.
Okay. Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not completely against Deputy Mayor Taylor's suggestion. If by some miracle I was able to convince council to go to option 1 and use the ORDC money, how does that account in following years? That's my concern, because we're using basically money found or returned to the taxpayers. That's going to run out when we get to $9.5 million, I believe. So how do we work that out after that? Thank you.
Ms. Syed, I'll turn that over to you for some financial expertise.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor McIntosh. So I'm glad that I did not change the document. So the town, ORDC does owe the town 9.2 in loan, and we did incorporate that over the extended period of the 5-year operating. So one of the caveats, what will happen once that money runs out? By then, based on some of our projection, may that be economic development, may that be just our growth per se, some of that will be captured because every year as we go through our assessment base and our budget process, the base budget grows, right? And some of that growth is captured in, and if through new growth. So usually what happens is if you look at our tax levy increase, there's a portion or there's a number that says pre-growth, and then we net it out against growth. So when we run out of money, and I'm trying to explain this in the most simplistic way possible, right? So what will happen is every year there's an increase to our base budget, and we use the growth factor, whatever the growth factor is, against that to reduce it. That's a natural way of it. It's not an artificial reduction. That's a natural way of doing it. All municipality does it. So the point I'm making is thus, we're looking at a future projection because for the foreseeable future, we did use the remainder of that 9.2. So by the time we get to that year where we're running out of that fund, there would be substantial growth within the budget envelope to absorb it, right? And I think that's the best explanation is, again, budget is a projection. Growth could go negative. I cannot predict those sort of things, but that's what budget is though. It is a projection and we have to make a decision based on the information we have at the time.
Thank you. Just one more thing. I'm kind of torn on this because if I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times from this council, that if you need more staff to get your jobs done, tell us and we'll give you the staff. Now we're turning around and saying, no, we can't afford the staff. So I feel sorry for staff because they're put in an awkward position. Thank you.
If I could make perhaps a comment on that. And, I want to be very clear to the management team and the senior leadership team that when we're talking about, and I know this can be a very emotional issue because all of you are so passionate about the work that you do in your own departments, but in all previous work that I've done in different corporations, there's always been some sort of an organizational review or a service level review before asks of this nature would come forward. And I think maybe that's the piece from this council. And I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody, but I know for me, coming into a budget and seeing an ask of 17 FTE, after only kind of hearing some anecdotal comments about the needs in certain departments is a little challenging because I like the anecdotal stories. Those are important to me, but I'm pretty data driven as well in how I make decisions. So my ask would be, and I know that it's painful for us to send it back and have you look at your FTE requests again and make additional changes because I do know how hard all of you work and I do know that you need additional staff. But my concern is that when we start adding FTEs, we are looking at raising that base budget continuously. These are full-time positions. They're not part-time contract positions. And that's going to impact our budget for many future years, including beyond when we're all still on council. So one of the things that I would really love to see, and I would love the support of my council on this, is I would love to see a data-driven service level organizational review that really highlights where the gaps are in the organization, where we maybe have people in wrong places, where we've got people we could move around, to really come with a fulsome picture on how we can make a plan going forward over the rest of this council term to acknowledge and fill all of the positions we know we need. I know all of us have heard, about the digital coordinator. We all want to up communications. I know the needs of the accessibility and EDI, sitting on the accessibility committee and having worked as an accessibility coordinator myself over the summer. I know the needs there. The makerspace is one I'm really passionate about too as a member of the library board. And these are all positions that I know are important. And I'm sorry, I don't know as much about capital work, so I'm not going to make any really great statements about those. But, I know that these are needs for everybody, but seeing that data come forward from an organizational study or an organizational review would really help in the next budget time. And Coming off an election, a budget's always challenging. We've got new members. We've had an election in between. The budget was done without the same kind of discussion that we may have had in years where there's not an election stopping us from having those conversations. So being presented with the budget this year, it was a bit challenging for me to see 17 FTEs and really no business cases outlined or data-driven outlines to those. So a lot of it was anecdotal stories, and I really appreciate those. And again, I know how hard each of these departments is working, but from my perspective, that's kind of where I'm coming at when it comes to the FTEs. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Mr. Koselak, can you maybe refresh me and maybe re-educate me? The damage prevention technician, you're wanting it in operating, but it's water. Why is that not funded through water, or am I misunderstanding?
Mr. Koselak.
Through your worship, that position would be funded, I don't know if it's 50% or 100% through the water rate. So it is for locating our water. I don't know. Madam Treasurer May can confirm if it's 100% or 50%.
That's not how it's presented in the budget, but I could be wrong.
Ms. Syed.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Sherwood, it is presented in our budget document underwater. So when you look at the SLCs, there are segregation between tax funding and water funding. So it is funded under. So SLC is the complete list of all the new service level changes. So anything that is funded through water is shown underwater.
Thank you.
I didn't quite phrase it the right way.
Okay, so.
Councillor Sherwood, do you have additional comment?
I do.
Okay.
I'm going to throw another little curveball here. So I respect where you're heading, Deputy Mayor, but I'm going to put another proposal on the table here, and this is something we can ponder. We're currently sitting with a budget of 3.1. We've asked, the mayor and ourselves have asked for this additional 0.25, puts us at 3.35. What if we took recommendation 2, but then we've approved it. Now we apply $388,000 from ORDC to make a 1% reduction. That makes the tax increase at 2.35. So think about it. Do I make sense? I'm saying, okay, let's approve recommendation 2. We're not using any ORDC funds. We're now approving a 3.35 budget. But now I'm saying, let's give back $388,000 of that 9.2 million and apply it now to give us a 1% tax reduction. I'll leave it with that.
Do we have comments, Deputy Mayor?
So again, I'm sorry to be so rigid in my responses, but I campaigned on not doing that. So I just can't. All I'm asking for is let's get through this and then we talk about what we do with that money. So I cannot allow us to fund that money on the budget. It has to go to the people for discussion and alignment in that way. And that's my thinking. And I feel like I need to be rigid about it because I knocked on people's doors and that's what I told them.
And so did I, Councillor, for sure. But we owe that money back. The treasurer has clearly indicated we owe the 9.2 million back. We're giving a small portion of it back to our people, and by giving them a 1% reduction, but we're not affecting services. Okay, the treasurer has something to say.
Ms. Syed.
Your Worship, if I may jump in just for a few minutes. Okay. So to Councillor Sherwood, in recommendation 2, we are using the interest revenue that we have earned on ORDC principle for 2022. I want to be absolutely clear that everybody is following that, right? You're suggesting that if we were to further take ORDC funding to reduce 1%, if I were to understand Mayor Post and Deputy Mayor Taylor, there is an appetite to bring some public consultation. So one of the ways we can mitigate this issue is by perhaps not taking that 1% worth of money from principals, but just revisiting the interest amount that we will be earning in 2023. So let me lay this out. So in 2022, for half a year, for 6 months, we earned 431,000. We have recently reinvested the principal amount, and the projection that I have and which I've shared with ORDC's board is that for the next 6 months, we'll probably be looking at close to $600,000, right? So if we do not wish to take the principal amount, we could very well take the interest amount that we're already factoring in recommendation 2, right? By approving or semi-approving recommendation 2, there's a tacit approval that ORDC interest money doesn't touch the principal, is available. So we can do that for 2023. I think that provides solution for, I don't want to say sides, but that provides solution for some of the things that the mayor is saying and the deputy mayor is saying, and then somebody else, some of you are saying too. That also provides a solution for the proposal that you're making, and that could, your worship, bring a swift closure to our budget quandary that we're facing tonight. So I'll leave it with that, and perhaps if you wish me to expand on this, I'm more than happy to do so.
I just have one additional question for you with your proposal. And does that direction need to come from the ORDC board, or can that be directed by council?
I think that can be directed by council tonight, and then the conversation can be initiated by ORDC. The reason I'm saying this is because at the end of the day, the town of Orangeville, the corporation of town of Orangeville, and I want to be absolutely clear about the the legality of it, is the owner of ORDC. ORDC is a private entity owned by the public entity called Town of Orangeville. So whether ORDC is returning the fund under the umbrella of a loan or returning the entire fund, it makes zero difference. All I'm saying is, if we are using the interest of 2022 for recommendation 2, then we can very well use
Recommendation 2 in the presentation. Can you put that on the screen, please? Just so you can, when you're talking about interest, we understand what you're talking about. I want the public to see that.
Oh.
There was a one that had.
Yes, there was.
And while you're doing that, I like where we're going from here. We all campaigned that we all said we wanted to give the public an engagement on the 32 million. We never said we wanted their direction on the interest we earn on that money. So I think we have an opportunity now, as Ms. Syed is alluring to, that we can take some of that money, that interest money, or we can start paying back the 9.2 and taking principal. But I'm liking the interest.
No,
and I think then that makes a very acceptable tax.
Paranormal activity. Okay.
Yes, are we having technical issues?
Yes, we are. And I don't know why of all the slides, that's the one that's missing. So I cannot explain. But if you want me to, I can talk you through this, if that's okay with council. So in 2022, based on the principal invested from ORDC sale of railway, ORDC made $431,000 in interest. That fund has been transferred over to town's coffer based on ORDC board direction. And that has been incorporated in recommendation 2. I want to pause to see if that's making sense to everyone. Thank you. So based on Councillor Sherwood's, can I call it recommendation, of decreasing the current 3.1% by a percentage and using further ORDC funding. So if there is no appetite to touch the principal, what I'm suggesting, it's not a recommendation, what I'm suggesting is that can be easily, that 1% can be easily mitigated by taking $383,000 from 2023 interest earned from ORDC investment. Because as I have said earlier, that the projection for the 6 months is more than that. So if we are going with recommendation 2, then what you're telling me that ORDC interest can be used to fund this budget, may that be 22 or 23. So that's one of the ways of funding this budget, approving it tonight without touching the principal amount, which if I'm hearing this correctly, there is an absolute desire for most of you to have some public consultation. So I'll leave it at that. I do apologize if for whatever reason that slide is missing, but I hope I've explained this.
Thank you very much, Ms. Syed. Councillor Sherwood.
So I know you don't have the slide, Ms. Syed, but you also talked in recommendation 2 about using some of 2023 interest. That was not ORDC interest. That was just our bank account, like our general bank account interest. So just wanted to clarify that because you did mention that in the presentation.
Yes, I did. And that is simply because during inflationary years, our bank accounts have money sitting, right? So in any inflationary year, we earn more than what we would earn in a typical year. So we have used, again, to offset some of the service level changes request, because we're taking away the ORDC fund transfer, principal, loan, whatever you want to call it, assumption. So we have used 2022 interest earned on general bank account, as well as 2023 interest earned on general bank account. We are also using 2022 ORDC interest earned. That's in the recommendation. Based on your suggestion, I'm further suggesting that we can now use 2023 ORDC interest earned to mitigate the 1% reduction that you're requesting. Hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Ms. Syed, my math on this is like, if you just assume rough math and said you were making 5% interest in 2023 on $32 million, you're getting $1.6 million. So there's actually more interest. Like this whole time, it didn't register, and we didn't talk about it, but there's actually more interest there that we could have been talking about than we had before, right?
Ms. Syed, I'll turn that over to you.
And that is correct. So at this point in time, we have reinvested only for 6 months, but we can extrapolate that, yes, we would be making, for the whole year, we would be making a lot of money. That said, I leave it to council. If you want to take more of ORDC interest money to reduce your tax levy even further, I leave it to council. But at this point in time, I was just providing a solution to both what Councillor Sherwood was suggesting and some of the conversations that I've been following since I've tabled the budget. So I'll leave it at that, Deputy Mayor, for now.
Deputy Mayor, do you have follow-up, or is that good for now?
Candidly, I feel silly that we've sat here this whole time and it was right in front of our faces, right? We didn't need to blow through this the last couple of hours. We could have been there before. So, maybe we need to understand what that interest rate is, what the amount is. Like my math at 5% is probably low. It's probably over 6 or higher, given the amount of money that we have. Maybe we need to understand what that is. Again, I don't think we're going to get there tonight. We're close. Maybe we understand that. We come back the following Monday, and there's something in here about an interest rate offset and what Councillor Sherwood is saying. And I think this is sewn up.
Councillor Andrews has additional comments, so I'll turn over to him first.
Just an observation with my fellow councillor colleague here. We're looking at 2023, and I know we're not looking at 2024, but Madam Treasurer, you've identified, and I really like where we're heading with this, but if we take an allocation from the interest that is, of course, garnered in 2023, how much? And, of course, do we negate any of that, or do we apply, of course, when we get to 2024, which we will be looking at in 6 to 7 months anyway? Will that be part of the equation?
So, Your Worship, if I may just point out that I did have the report up now, so it's not the PowerPoint slide, but I think Councillor Sherwood wanted to see the breakdown of recommendation too. So I don't know whether it's showing up on the other screen. It's okay.
It's not on our screen, but I believe it's on 287, page 287 of our budget package.
Right, but it's all Okay, there it is. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody can see that breakdown. Now, back to Councillor Andrews' question. So projection of interest is dependent on two things. And the first thing is the market condition, right? One of the reasons we are talking about general bank account interest increase is because market is swinging in the right direction as far as interest rates are concerned. Right? So I don't know what 24 will look like. Would we head into recession? Will there will be a crash in the market? I don't know. So that's variable or the factor one. Factor two is the actual principal amount that we will invest. At this point in time, we have access to the entire principal amount because none of that has been earmarked, if I can use that word ever. So I don't know whether and again, this is based on what I've been hearing for the last few weeks. I don't know whether there will be a concrete plan for that principal amount between now and 24. So without those two factors, it's really difficult for me to say that interest earned will be $1 million, $1.6 million. What I can concretely answer right now is that the principal amount invested for the next 6 months, because that's happening in real time, will yield us close to $600,000, and that would allow for Councillor Sherwood's proposal, or if I can call it that, to be funded through ORDC interest. I hope I'm not really trying to skirt it, but I'm really giving you a very realistic answer at this point in time.
Absolutely, and I think investments are just that. I mean, they're not guaranteed. We're working with kind of what we know, and that's changing. Deputy Mayor. My apologies, Councillor Sherwood.
Sorry,
It was you
wasn't
first, and then Deputy Mayor.
So again, to go over my colleagues, we can go with my proposal right here, which lands us at a 2.35 increase with the recommendation that Councillor Post and I have added to add 95,000 to the community funds. Or we could elaborate this more, but the thing is, I don't want to assume we're making this much interest. You know, like it could be $500,000, $1 million, it could be 600,000. Do we here want to have a number at 2? Or do we want it to be 2.35? I'm happy with the 2.35. And then we still got that interest still, you know, accumulating. I don't want to just sit there and say, let's take it all and just leave the principal balance. I'm very happy with the 2.35, but are my colleagues wanting to reduce it even further? And if we are, I would suggest we take the advice of our treasurer.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. So again, the amount that you would do in the calculation, I think it's really important that we understand the calculation, and why it's important is, yes, we can do what you're suggesting, Councillor Sherwood, and I think it's a really great suggestion. But then this is why I love the collaboration. Councillor Andrews has brought something up that is really, really important, and that is, you know, today's gold is tomorrow's fool's gold, right? So, you know, even if you do it at 6%, 6% is 1.9, and it also assumes for how long you would take it. I mean, there's lots of variables, and that's why I think it would be good to have an understanding of that from the treasurer next time we meet. But if it's 1.9 and, you know, you're suggesting you need, I don't know, maybe it's 900,000. All you need to do is set up and say, okay, so we're going to take this section, and the other 900,000 is set aside for 2024. So that you have the offset. And yes, at some point you're going to have to pay the piper. However, you might be out of this malaise that we find ourselves in, right? So as long as we didn't take it all this year and we earmark it specifically for an offset for 2024, it would be fine. But that's why I think it's important that we understand from our master guru here what those deliverables would be. And I almost think you suggest you should do a pile of, say, okay, we think it's 5. What if it's 6? What if it's 7? And probably more than that's not prudent. But we should understand all the variables and then make a prudent suggestion to fit what you're talking about for this year, and also dovetail with what you know your brilliant observation for what could be coming down the pipe. Oh, I'm sorry, it's your test. Okay, but that's what I think we should do. I think we should stop tonight with the instructions of finding out in a week what our treasurer thinks.
Well, and I think Deputy Mayor Taylor and Councillor Andrews make some good points, because one of the things that we are looking to do is approve the operating budget for 5 years and in principle. So it would be great to see some of those numbers come back at another budget meeting with some of these factors taken into consideration. Did you have something else to add? It looked like you were about to say something. Master Guru Syed.
I'll take it. It's 10 o'clock. Any monikers, I'll take it. So Your Worship, and if I can, and if I may, make this simplify this for my own mental health. So really, if I'm hearing Councillor Sherwood, and I'm really trying to organize this in my head so that I don't lose my title. So what Councillor Sherwood is saying, whether this will be further debated or not, is that at 3.1, adding your additional request of 95,000, we are at 3.35. She would be very happy, your words, that if we go down to 2.35, that's a percentage decrease, which is $383,000. I've shown you that table. Now that's one of the things that I suggested, that we can fund that through the interest that we would be earning in 2023 for ORDC funds that we have already invested. So the funds that I've already invested at 5.06% or 0.8%, don't quote me on that, it's pretty late right now. I can reasonably say that the interest we will be earning at that rate for the principal amount that we invested is more than 383,000. So if we decouple that, then we can say reasonably, based on, we don't need projection, that fund has already been invested for another 6 months. We know for sure that with the invested fund, we will make that money, because when you buy GICs, it's called guaranteed income for a reason. So that amount is guaranteed, right? So for the next 6 months, we will earn more than 383,000. To Deputy Mayor's point, we actually would be earning more than that if we extrapolate that and take it for the whole 12 months with other interest rates. The only caveat in that is I don't work for Bank of Canada and I'm not an economist by training. So for me, it would be very difficult to ascertain what the interest rates will be towards the end of the year. That said, what I can suggest that if we would like to prolong this conversation or further this conversation, perhaps council can create a reserve to store the ORDC interest money for future budget consideration, right? That kind of takes care of your point. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I don't need to project this. I can guarantee you, because I've invested it, for the next 6 months, the money that we will be earning through the principal invested in interest for ORDC funds, we will be making more than 383,000. So if council wishes for tonight to approve the budget with that caveat, with that added line in the recommendation, I think we can all go home and have a good night's sleep. Thank you, Worship.
I think one thing, and I appreciate exactly where you're coming from, and I think one thing that would be nice to have before we fully move forward with an approval would be to know what the rest of that number is. You're saying more than 383, but is it 600? Is it 700? Is it $1 million? Is it 3 million? Because then we have a better understanding on how we're moving forward. And that additional time would also give us time to flesh out the 95,000 and have a more solidified plan for that money. Is the total. Isayed?
So it would be anywhere within the range of 580 to 600,000, and that's why. And I can get you the exact number. So I think I've kind of alluded, because with the GIC, I already know what the interest would be. That's the whole idea of a GIC. So it would be anywhere between. I'm looking at different screens here. So it'll be anywhere between 580 and 600,000. So my team is telling me it's 592,000. Well, there you go. I listened to them. So it's definitely more than 383.
Thank you, Ms. Syed. Councillor McIntosh has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Madam Treasurer, to keep everybody happy, if we were to use that full amount, we could also get some of the full-time positions that are so badly needed. I'll just throw that out there, and keep the tax increase at the lower level that Councillor Sherwood suggested.
So through your worship to Councillor McIntosh. So if we go by the math, if we stick with the 592,000, if we dedicate 383,000 to reduce the 1%, and I'm looking to my left to make sure that we would be looking at a $209,000 balance or delta. So $209,000 would save probably 1.5 position. I will turn this back to you because I cannot choose. They're all my favorites. So I'll turn that back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you. If I'm kind of understanding what I'm hearing from council, it sounds like everybody would like to see maybe some more detail about how this proposal could work at another budget meeting. I just want to get kind of some agreement. Is anybody comfortable with moving it forward 100% and approving it tonight? Or do we need to see some additional commentary on these? Okay, so to be fair to the council colleagues around me, and I know you're eager to get this approved, and we all are, we do have a budget meeting scheduled for the 24th, Tuesday the 24th, and at that time, it would be really great if some of the conversation that we've had here tonight has been captured so that we can have an understanding of what that final percentage would look like. And I think that everybody's kind of nodded in agreement to about 2.35 would be an acceptable target rate. If we can go even lower than that, that's always good. But also to see what those additional FTE components would look like. It would be great to have that conversation with the general management team and the management team to see how that would impact our organization. And I think some of those components would be important for me to see before I'm comfortable approving it. And I do also want to flush out my motion to give a little bit more confidence to my council colleagues on what I'm proposing with that $95,000. So with that, Deputy Mayor?
May I just ask, Ms. Syed, you're coming up with slightly different numbers than me, and it's occurred to me that maybe the principle that you're talking about may not be is it 32 you're working off of, or is it a different amount? Can you tell me the amount just so that I can have it in my mind that you're working off of to come? I guess I could have figured it out backwards, but I'd rather you just tell me.
Your Worship, may I?
Yes, Ms. Syed, my apologies.
Thank you. No problem. Through Your Worship to Deputy Mayor. So you're correct, because originally in 2022, these funds came to us in different timelines. So the investments happened in different timeline. And as these investments are coming to term, we are again reinvesting. So the 592 that I just indicated is based on City of Brampton sale, because that was the first chunk of money, if I can put it that way, that we received. So this is based on, and I'm just looking to my left. So that would help, and I can provide you some numbers. I mean, clearly, I'm trying to, stay balanced here. Does that answer your question, Deputy Mayor?
Deputy Mayor. Can you just tell me the number you're working? You gave a number of 596. Is that 25 million? Yes?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I think those components would be important to come back on the 24th as well, just so that we have an idea of exactly what we're working with. And then we've got some of the math components worked out as well. Ms. Syed, that works.
Thank you, Worship. Can I ask for one clarification, though, Your Worship?
Absolutely.
Please. Allowed tonight. So I understand that really the direction of the suggestion is we're leaning more towards recommendation 2. I'm also hearing that there is a interest or a appetite for reducing the rate by a percentage. And there is also an appetite to use perhaps the entire interest amount for this particular investment, which is 592. So that means the delta of $200,000. One of the recommendation or one of the suggestion is whether we can save some of the FTEs that we cut under recommendation 2. So in terms of that, will there be any direction, or is your expectation that we would, or the senior leadership would come up with? I'm sorry, I'm asking that question because we don't have enough time to, we're talking about coming back on January the 24th.
Yeah, 1 week. Councillor McIntosh, I think, has a comment.
Thank you. Maybe I'm stepping out of turn, but I would suggest it would be up to the leadership team to decide.
That would be my thought as well. I think they know the ones that they had the hardest time letting go of and where the most bang would happen with some of those. And again, I think that we talked about some creative solutions for some of them. I liked the suggestion that Ms. Landry had about using a one-year contract that was available to fund the digital coordinator, even just for that first year as a trial to get it going. I think that was a great suggestion and maybe one that we could look at as well. So I'd love to see all of those components flushed out before the 24th. I know that's a tight timeline with the week, but if there's any way that we can assist, please let us know. But I think that would be, Mr. Osmond, turning it over to you. Does that seem like a reasonable timeline?
Your worship, as I said earlier, we started up, we're going to be very flexible and we're going to find time to get it done because it's extremely important. And I just want clarity on one item. The 95,000 gets kicked around. Just for clarity, there is a line item for grants under our economic development budget, and that's where the theater piece would go. So there was $20,000, the number you used, Deputy Mayor, for theater. And then was that included in 95 or was it 95 on a standalone for the other pieces that you discussed?
95,000 was to be used for community grant initiatives that would look for more than 5 years at a time of funding, or 5 years or more. Because I think we have some residual asks that we continue to see. As I mentioned, Food Bank was one of them. Deputy Mayor Taylor had suggested that on top of the money that is already given to the theater, there's a need for an additional 15,000 or 20,000, whatever that number is, that would be a residual ask for the next 5 years that would come out of the community grants line.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that is it part of the 95,000 that we've added or is it additional to the 95,000?
No, correct, as part of the 95. So it would be that we would kind of pre-allocate. We know that there's a couple of the asks within the 95 that we know already exist, one being the Out of the Cold program for 30,000 and one being Theatre Orangeville. And then we know that there are some others that are upcoming. So that would be all encompassed in that 95.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I also ask a clarifying question and just make sure that I'm grasping this as we go. So again, I appreciate you giving me the number. So I come up with 1250, right? $1.25 million annually is what we'd be talking about. You're talking about potentially, the offset of 1% is 300 and change. And then you would need to do that again. So you would have, to your point, you would have more than enough money. But whatever we do with the FTEs, you could really only take a portion of that. So essentially half, right? So if my math was right and it's 1250, you would take 625 in 2023, and then we'll call it the Tess and Joe plan. The other portion would go to 2024. So whatever that half is, or whatever that number is, you'd recommend. But I mean, we can't be flat-footed, right? So you can't take the whole thing because then we don't have any clothes on in 2024, right?
Deputy Mayor, you make a good point, and I think part of what the treasurer had tried to highlight before is that these are in 6-month GICs, so using an annual number might be difficult to predict what those next stage GICs would be, but I understand your concept.
Yeah, that's what we need though, is an annual number, right? Because you would still get the money for the full year, and odds are the consultation is going to take us through. We won't spend this money, so we will get all that interest, and then we need to do what these two fine people are suggesting, which is right, and that is keep half the money. So if there's extra money over and above the Sherwood plan to implement the Macintosh plan, we need to hit the Pendergrass Andrews plan. I'm just the announcer. All right.
So if you could maybe capture some of that and when you come back as well, Madam Treasurer, that would be wonderful.
And am I allowed to call them the plans that Deputy Mayor said?
It's 10:30. We're in creative plan names at this point.
Okay.
So I will leave it at that for now. Do you, Ms. McDonald, do you need an official motion of what we just said? Did you capture that? Could you turn on your mic and just read it out? Thank you.
Essentially, Mayor opposed it would be the mind, being that staff report back at the January with the that would be 2 in report as 2023 date, including dollars, an increase line item for community grants, and the report back should also outline implications of using the ORDC interest potential.
Perfect. Yep, that was good. Well captured. Was there any additional comment from anybody? Ms. Ayad? No, we're good. Okay, can we have a mover for that motion, please? Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Was there any further discussion on that item? We will call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Wonderful. Okay, so we are going to go on because we do have a couple of other things. There is no correspondence or committee board minutes. There are no notice of motion prior to meeting. Are there any here tonight? Seeing none. Any items of new business that any members of council would like to highlight tonight? Seeing none, it is time for question period. I'll ask Mona first. Is there anybody on the line who's wishing to ask a question virtually? I know we've got a lot of people on the line today, so. Thank you. There's nobody? Okay, so there's no public members on the line, so I will turn it over to those in the gallery. Mr. Gristo, if you can please have a seat, state your name for the record. And I will just remind everybody that it is 10:30, so we're going to try and keep our question period pretty tight tonight. Mr. Gristo, over to you. If you could please state your name and address for the record.
These chairs, they're moving too quick. Madam Mayor, that's right. They do run away. Ugh. Anyway, Madam Mayor, I'll be very quick and swift. Relate to the two question of, Deputy Mayor Taylor last night, when he asked me relate to the $100 per month or 150. I had to do some housework to get some numbers. My understanding during the election was 11,500 households within the town. Now, if you take that at $150, okay, across the board, the town will be getting, will bring in $1,650,000. That's on a flat rate on the water meters. Now, if you take the 100, that will bring $1,100,000. The same thing per month, $100 a month. Now, the question I have, I'm a senior. I have no issues to pay equally. Same as somebody that has a family. And I'm very passionate on these meters from day one when they were introduced in this town. And I'm still passionate today. It is a major cost that you guys gonna head on millions of dollars to replace those meters. I kid you not.
Mr. Gristo, we take your point very well. We appreciate your feedback. At this time, I can tell you council has no desire to revisit the water meter program. It's in its next phase of rollout. We've changed our methods to stop being an equal distribution and make it an equitable distribution to try and level the playing field for everybody so that people are paying for what they use. That moved forward a number of years ago and it won't be revisited at this time. Was there any additional comments that you had or questions?
Madam Mayor, you want to be fair, right? So charge a little extra for the families, if that's what you want.
Well,
and give a reduction to seniors.
Well, Mr. Gristo, with all due respect, that's what we're doing by using the water meters. We're making it an equitable distribution based on your usage rather than trying to.
Madam Mayor, you listen to my comments. I'm here.
I'm hearing
give you some feedback. It's up to you as a councilor here if you want to proceed with it. Unfortunately, I'm speaking for 2,183 people that they voted for me. I'm standing here speaking for them too. And I can tell you, I don't like it. I don't like what this council is going to do, is spend all this money to change these meters. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Gristo.
It was another question that I had to bring, but I think a councilor, I guess, Pelcast, she brought to the forefront about the bus for the bars. And I think Mr. Tim Koshaleki made a good point. Maybe taxi is one way to go about it. Get a taxi to go there. Maybe the town can kick in a few dollars.
Yep.
That's, it was mentioned by Anthony last night. He said, could you please bring to the forefront? And I'm here, bring it to the forefront.
Thank you.
But I think Council Pendergast, she did it. So there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Gristo. Was there any additional questions from the gallery tonight? Mr. Ramsey, you can come up, have a seat, state your name and address for the record again, please.
Been a long night. Noel Ramsey, 15 Feed Street in Orangeville. Just a taxpayer. It's interesting sitting listening to this this evening because I feel kind of overwhelmed because I mean you have the council and you have all the different departments and their backup staff. And when I say I'm just a taxpayer, at the very end of this council meeting, I think that Mayor Taylor kind of cut to the chase here is we're really talking about what percentage is a reasonable percent. And I had a lot of notes here compiled as to why we should not be looking at 3.1 because what bothered me with the finance presentation was when you looked at all the other municipalities, they're all in the 3 and the 5 and the 6% range. But those municipalities don't have the savings account of the ORDC, the $35 million. If you take that out of the equation, what was initially proposed with the option 1 there is a 12.3%. And if you put that 12.3% against that list, it looks outrageous compared to those other municipalities. I like a lot of the things that were discussed tonight. Last night we heard about better playgrounds. We heard about out of the cold problems. We hear people are not satisfied with their grass cutting. They want it a little bit more frequently. Expanding transit. These are all nice things. And in the library, we want to be cutting edge. But we're talking about where we're trying to have a problem meeting a 3% budget, and we are talking about all these great add-ons. So I'm glad at the end you came to a different solution in the last 5% of the time we spent here tonight. What does bother me is finance's approach to certain elements. What caught me particularly was Councillor Sherwood's comment with regards to the tax write-offs. You can't have a zero element for tax write-off. You set aside $250,000 to cover tax write-offs, which you normally would do. You can't just say, let's use that money and go to zero. It doesn't make financial sense. The other thing that really boggled my mind was in the past, well, in the many years that I've lived in Orangeville, the railroad was a chain around our neck, and we paid anything from $400,000 to $500,000 to keep that organization afloat. It cost us $400,000 to $500,000 every year. Now we've moved past that point. Why shouldn't we reap the benefit? Don't touch the principal, but the interest that that thing generates should be fair game. We're just getting back what we were putting in when they had a shortfall. So my apologies, it's not really a question. Just like my children, I love them very much, but there's some nights that they really get me upset. And I must say, really didn't like to see that we came through all of this evening to find that we're considering using certain funds that shouldn't be touched. And the fact that we've got this chunk of interest, whether you don't know if you can use it all or not, or what it belongs to. You're at a budget meeting, and this should all be cleared up ahead of time before you walk into this room. So I must admit, I'm quite disappointed with how the budget was presented to you and how it was put together. As a taxpayer, I feel like the third party. I like to think of myself as the first party in the sequence because I'm the one who pays for the services. You oversee the services, they put it together, and they manage it and deliver it. But what I'm paying for tonight, I wasn't really pleased with. I do like the people that we have on council, and I have a lot of, I do like the people that work for the town, but I must say this evening I was disappointed with how things rolled out. And I hope that on the next council meeting for the budget, you pick up where you left off in the last 5%. Thanks.
Mr. Ramsey, I'm just going to make one comment to that, and it's in defense of our treasurer and the way that the budget process is put together. So the budget itself as a working document is a contribution of a number of different things, including all of the general managers' asks, all of the department managers' asks, and all of those components are captured in the budget of the wish list of what we need to run the town. The treasurer does a great job putting that together and finding funding sources for those asks. And what she's tasked to do is to put the asks of the town staff together for council to deliberate and come up with how we want to move forward, because ultimately we're the governance and we're going to make the decisions on how we move forward and which monies are actually spent. So with respect to the treasurer, I think she did a phenomenal job putting together the budget in a pretty tough year with inflationary pressures that haven't been seen before, and use some different assumptions that could find different ways to manipulate the budget. And that's where that first recommendation came from, is taking into account some of those ORDC funds that we are a fortunate municipality to have where others don't have. I understand the frustration of watching it, but part of what we do here is deliberate and have questions and be able to ask all of those questions of staff, of the treasurer, and find different and creative ways to solve all of the problems so that ultimately the taxpayer is happy not only with the tax rate, but also with the service levels. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. So it typically is a little messy as we get started, but what we always come together with is a collaboration amongst our council team on how we're going to move forward to best serve our residents.
I just like to say, from a taxpayer point of view, the person who's paying for it, I do hear what you say. I know that you appreciate the good work that they do.
Absolutely.
I just think it could have been done better. The concept of the interest from the ORDC that was sitting there, the choice to take just a portion of it, and no one knew the rest of it was sitting on the table until someone asked the right question.
I will clarify that component as well, is that the direction for the initial 400 and some odd thousand that we're using of the ORDC interest rate did go to the ORDC board for approval before that was ever included in the budget. So at the ORDC board meeting, the additional interest from the new reinvestment wasn't discussed as part of the transfer. So it's most appropriate for the treasurer to run that by the ORDC board before it would be incorporated into the budget as an assumption, because that money is not housed currently within the town of Orangeville coffers. It's housed with the ORDC coffers, which run as two completely separate organizations. So in order for that transfer to happen of the initial 400,000 that we're using of the interest money, that was at the direction of the ORDC board, who gave the treasurer of the ORDC direction that it could be utilized.
Okay, so I do have one question. That is, since the town owns ORDC, correct?
The town is a shareholder, the primary and sole shareholder, yes.
At what point are we going to come, or is the town going to come to a conclusion as to what to do with these funds?
So as of right now, those funds sit in the ORDC coffers. And at some point, once all the closing costs are dealt with and all of the other operational pieces of ORDC that are still lingering need to be done, that money will be transferred ultimately to the town coffers. The discussion that our council has had as part of election promises and through other discussions was we want to have community consultation on how those funds are ultimately going to be used. In conversation with the CAO, those consultations will be starting very soon, probably in the spring, where we can start to have some of those discussions. And then ultimately, once that money is transferred over, we'll make the decision on how that money is spent. We could leave it in GICs from now until whenever and only ever use the interest if we wanted to, if that's the will of the public.
Who's investing the money? Is it the town or is it the ORDC?
The ORDC treasurer is investing it on behalf of ORDC. It's not being invested on behalf of the town at this point because the money sits in the ORDC coffers, not in the town's coffers, because they're still closing pieces, components that are happening with the sales of ORDC.
How does the town get access to the interest from the ORDC?
Through the ORDC board.
And why would they?
It's transferred.
Why would they just give us a portion and not all the interest that they accumulated?
At the time that it was brought up to the treasurer, it was discussed just that amount, which was the amount that was earned in 2021. Yeah. 22, I was right with my initial number. Sorry, my apologies.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Was there any additional questions? Mr. Ugolini, again, we're at 10:45. We do have a hard stop at 11, so I'm going to just encourage you to ask your questions and please state your name and address first and just pull the mic down a little. Oh, there we go. You're
That way I'll stand up.
Thank you.
I can leave sooner. I'd like to thank you all. First, I really appreciate you all listening last night. I was shocked. No offense, you know, like I remember the old council. So anyway,
No offense taken. We take that as a compliment. Thank you.
I have a pretty good laundry list here. I narrowed it down from 10 pages to 1. And I'm just going to ask one question. The gas tax on the buses, the transportation. How much do you figure we're going to gain with this gas tax and compare that to how much we're going to lose by not charging fares?
That's kind of the ultimate question. I will turn it over to Mr. Koslak. He did touch on it briefly tonight, but I'll let him take that one.
Through your worship, right now we don't have the exact numbers. We're going to run the calculations. We will do a few estimates and we can bring it back to the next budget meeting on Tuesday next week to give a bit of an example. I guess it's all predictions on.
Is it going to be like $10,000 and we lose 152,000? Or is it going to be somewhere like over 100,000? Like, really, does it make any sense?
Mr. Ugolini, I think the one caveat that I would add to what you're saying, because I know where you're going with this, when the decision was made for free transit, the gas tax money was part of the equation that we put into it. But ultimately, it was that we wanted to invest in transit. We wanted to find a way to increase ridership and to invest in transit. And the decision was ultimately made not only on the gas tax money, that was definitely a component of it, but we knew that $162,000 a year was going to be an investment on behalf of the town in order to offer this program. And we've been looking at creative ways through the budget process to mitigate those spends in other spots so that it won't impact the taxpayer.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mr. Ugolini.
Todd, you should have had just the orange.
Was there any additional questions from members of the public tonight? Seeing none? Okay. It's been a very long evening. It's been a very long budget process. I look forward to seeing everybody on Monday for a council meeting and then Tuesday for a budget meeting. The next item is our bylaws. There's a recommendation that the bylaws below be read 3 times and finally passed. It's the confirming bylaw for the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville for its operating budget meeting held tonight. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Stevens. Any discussion? I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried unanimously. And a motion to adjourn, please. Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. Have a safe night.